One last drink?
Said the Alpha King as she was closing the bar. Prologue. Stella didn't know that the man knocking on her tavern door at midnight was the Alpha King of the Northern Territories. She didn't know that opening that door would activate an ancient magic so rare that most wolves lived entire lifetimes without witnessing it. All she knew, standing there with her hand on the bolt while 3 sharp knocks echoed through the empty tavern, was that every survival instinct she'd honed over 3 years of hiding screamed at her to walk away, to pretend she hadn't heard, to let whoever stood in the darkness stay there. But something else, something deeper than instinct, older than fear, pulled her forward. She opened the door. The man on her threshold had amber eyes that seemed to glow like embers and a face carved from exhaustion and loneliness. He looked at her the way drowning men looked at shore, desperate, disbelieving, achingly hopeful. "One last drink?" he asked, his voice rough velvet wrapping around her bones. "Before you close for the night?" Stella should have said no. Should have recognized the danger in the way her heart stuttered at the sound of his voice, in the strange warmth blooming suddenly in her chest where nothing had been before. Instead, she stepped back, gestured him inside, watched him cross her threshold like he was coming home. And when their eyes met properly, when that warmth in her chest exploded into sunlight, and she heard his thought as clearly as if he'd spoken aloud, "Please let this be real," Stella understood with terrible, beautiful clarity. She'd just opened the door to her destiny, but she didn't know yet that destiny could be broken, or that fighting to reclaim it would cost her everything. If you love intense stories about wolves, with destiny and twists and turns, subscribe to the channel now. We post videos every day, so subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any episodes. How about we get to know each other better? I'm Maggie Reed, author of the stories. And you? Comment below with your name and which city you're watching from. Chapter 1. The smell of spilled beer and lemon polish was so familiar that Stella barely noticed it anymore. She moved through the dim interior of the Crescent Moon Tavern with practiced efficiency, wiping down tables that still bore the sticky rings left by evening patrons, collecting abandoned glasses, and humming softly to herself, a habit she'd developed over the 3 years she'd worked here. The tune was something her grandmother used to sing, back when Stella was small enough to believe in fairy tales and happy endings. Those days felt like a lifetime ago. Now, at 26, she believed in simpler things: hard work, honest pay, and the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. The tavern wasn't glamorous, far from it, actually, but it was hers in all the ways that mattered. Old Greta, the owner, had given her a chance when no one else would, and Stella had repaid that kindness with loyalty and long hours that stretched well past midnight most nights. Tonight was no different. The last customer had stumbled out around 11:30, singing off-key and weaving slightly as he made his way down the cobblestone street. Stella had locked the heavy wooden door behind him, flipped the sign to closed, and begun the familiar ritual of cleaning up. She was bent over a particularly stubborn stain on one of the corner tables, something that looked suspiciously like wine mixed with candle wax, when she heard the knock. 3 sharp raps, deliberate and clear, cutting through the silence. Stella straightened, frowning. It was well past closing time, and anyone from the neighborhood would know better than to come knocking now. For a moment, she considered ignoring it, pretending she hadn't heard, finishing her work and heading up to the small room she rented above the tavern. But then the knock came again, and something in the rhythm of it, patient but insistent, made her pause. With a small sigh, she crossed to the door, unlatched the heavy bolt, and opened it just enough to peer through the gap. The man standing on her doorstep made her breath catch in her throat. He was tall, taller than anyone she'd seen in the neighborhood, with shoulders that seemed to fill the entire doorway. Dark hair fell to his collar, slightly disheveled as though he'd been running his hands through it, and his eyes were the most startling shade of amber she'd ever seen. They seemed to glow faintly in the light spilling from the tavern, like embers in a dying fire. But it wasn't his appearance that made Stella's heart skip. It was the way he looked at her, with a focus so intense it felt like he was seeing straight through to her bones. "We're closed," she managed, and was proud that her voice came out steady despite the sudden flutter in her chest. "Kitchen's shut down. Last call was an hour ago. I know. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel wrapped in honey. I saw the sign, but I was hoping you might make an exception. Stella should have said no. Every instinct she'd developed working in taverns and inns told her not to let strange men in after closing time, no matter how politely they asked. But there was something in his expression, a weariness that she recognized, a loneliness that mirrored her own, that made her hesitate. "One drink," she heard herself say. "That's all. And then I'm locking up for real." Something flickered across his face. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. And he nodded. "One drink. I promise." Stella stepped back, opening the door wider, and watched as he entered. He moved with a strange grace for someone so large, each step deliberate and careful, as though he was used to being aware of exactly how much space he occupied. She gestured to the bar. "Sit wherever you like." "What can I get you?" He settled onto one of the high stools, and she noticed how his hands rested on the polished wood. Strong hands, scarred across the knuckles, but with long fingers that suggested precision rather than brutality. "Whiskey, if you have it," he said. "Neat." Stella moved behind the bar, pulling down a bottle of the decent stuff. Not the rotgut they served to the dock workers, but the smooth amber liquid that Greta reserved for customers who appreciated it. She poured a generous measure into a clean glass and slid it across the counter. He picked it up, studied the color for a moment, then took a slow sip. His eyes closed briefly, and she saw tension drain from his shoulders. "Long day?" she asked, surprising herself. She usually didn't chat with customers, especially not strangers who showed up after midnight. "Long year," he corrected, opening his eyes to look at her. "Maybe longer. It all runs together after a while." Stella understood that feeling more than she wanted to admit. She leaned against the back counter, arms crossed, studying him openly now that she had the excuse of conversation. "You're not from around here," she said. It wasn't a question. His clothes were too fine, travel-worn but clearly expensive. And there was something in the way he held himself that spoke of authority, of being used to people listening when he spoke. "No," he agreed. "Just passing through. Needed a quiet place to think." The Crescent Moon isn't exactly known for its thinking atmosphere. Most people come here to stop thinking. That pulled a smile from him, small but genuine. "Maybe that's what I need, to stop thinking for a while." She poured herself a small measure of whiskey without really intending to. Greta wouldn't mind, and something about this strange man with his amber eyes and his careful movements made her want to linger, to talk, even though she couldn't explain why. "What's your name?" he asked. "Stella." She raised her glass slightly. "And you?" He hesitated, and she saw conflict cross his face, as though the simple question of his name carried weight she couldn't understand. Finally, he said, "Adrian." It didn't feel like the whole truth, but Stella didn't press. Everyone had their secrets. "Well, Adrian," she said, taking a sip of her own drink. "Welcome to the Crescent Moon. It's not much, but it's honest. Honest is good," he said quietly. "Honest is rare." They fell into comfortable silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. Stella found herself watching him from the corner of her eye, noting small details. The way his fingers traced absent patterns on the bar, the tension that never quite left his jaw, the way his gaze kept drifting to her face and then away, as though he was trying not to stare. It should have made her nervous. Instead, it made her curious. "Can I ask you something?" she said, breaking the quiet. "Of course. Why here? There are 3 other taverns on this street alone, at least one of them still open. Why knock on a closed door?" Adrian was silent for a long moment, studying his whiskey as though it held answers. When he finally spoke, his voice was so soft she had to lean closer to hear, because the light was still on, and something about this place felt safe. The honesty in those words hit Stella somewhere in the center of her chest, a place she'd learned to keep carefully guarded. She opened her mouth to respond, to say something light and deflecting when it happened. The air between them seemed to shimmer, just for a heartbeat. A warmth spread through Stella's body, starting at her breastbone and radiating outward. Not uncomfortable, but startling enough to make her gasp. Adrian's head snapped up, eyes widening. "Did you feel that?" Yes, what was... And then, impossible as it was, she heard his voice in her head. Not his speaking voice, but something deeper, rawer, stripped of all pretense. Please let this be real. Just once. Let something be real. Stella stumbled backward, her glass slipping from her hand. It hit the floor and shattered, whiskey spreading in a dark stain across the wooden boards. But she barely noticed. "What's happening?" she breathed. Adrian was on his feet, one hand pressed to his chest as though his heart was racing as fast as hers. "The echo," he said, and his voice was rough with shock. "But that's impossible. It only activates between..." He cut himself off, but Stella had heard enough. Because somehow, impossibly, she'd heard his next thought too. Between souls that are meant to be bound. "I don't understand," she whispered. Adrian looked at her, and in his amber eyes she saw wonder and fear and something that looked terrifyingly like hope. "The soul echo," he said slowly, as though each word cost him. "It's an ancient law. When two people are meant to be connected, when their souls recognize each other, they can hear each other's deepest thoughts, but only when they're close, and only if both of them want it." "That's just a story," Stella said, even as her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, telling tales of magic and destiny by firelight. "Those things aren't real. They're real." Adrian took a careful step toward her, moving slowly as though approaching something fragile. "And ours just activated, which means..." "No." Stella held up a hand, needing space, needing air, needing this to make sense. "No, this is crazy. You're a stranger. I don't know you. We can't just... I'm so tired of being alone." The thought wasn't hers, but it resonated through her like a bell, and she knew with absolute certainty that it had come from him. And worse, he'd heard her answer, "So am I." Their eyes met across the shattered glass and spilled whiskey, and Stella felt the world tilt sideways. Because this man, this Adrian with his careful hands and his amber eyes, and his soul that was somehow, impossibly, speaking directly to hers, wasn't just a stranger anymore. He was something far more dangerous. He was the beginning of everything changing. Chapter 2. The silence that followed stretched between them like a living thing, heavy with questions neither of them knew how to ask. Stella's hands were shaking, so she clenched them into fists at her sides, trying to regain some sense of control over a situation that had spun wildly beyond anything she understood. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and she could still feel that strange warmth in her chest. Not painful, but present, like a second heartbeat that wasn't quite her own. Adrian hadn't moved from where he stood on the other side of the bar, but his knuckles were white where they gripped the edge of the counter. He was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Shock, yes, but something else underneath. Something that looked like longing. "I should go," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled. I shouldn't have come here. I'm sorry." He turned toward the door and Stella felt a sharp, inexplicable panic lance through her chest. "Wait." The word came out before she could stop it, urgent and louder than she'd intended. Adrian froze, his hand already on the door handle. Slowly, he turned back to face her. "Don't go," Stella said, softer this time. She didn't understand why it mattered, why the thought of him walking out into the night felt suddenly, unbearably wrong. "Not yet. Not until you explain what just happened." "I don't know if I can explain it." Adrian's jaw was tight, tension radiating from every line of his body. The soul echo is old magic, older than most people remember. And it's supposed to be rare, so rare that most wolves go their entire lives without experiencing it. "Wolves," Stella repeated, and then the pieces clicked into place with startling clarity. The amber eyes that seemed to glow, the predatory grace, the sense of barely contained power that clung to him like a second skin. "You're a shifter." It wasn't a question, but Adrian nodded anyway. "Yes, and so are you, unless I'm very much mistaken." Stella's wolf stirred at the acknowledgement. The part of herself she'd kept carefully buried for years, ever since she'd left her birth pack under circumstances she tried hard not to think about. She'd been living as human as possible in this human city, keeping her head down, avoiding anything that might draw attention to what she was. "I don't shift anymore," she said quietly. "Haven't in 3 years." Something sad flickered across Adrian's face. That must be lonely. The understanding in his voice made her throat tighten. "It's safer." Safer than what? Stella shook her head, not willing to go down that path. Not with a stranger, no matter how strangely connected they suddenly were. "You said the soul echo means our souls recognize each other. What does that actually mean?" Adrian seemed to weigh his words carefully before answering. He moved back toward the bar, not sitting this time, but standing close enough that Stella could see the fine lines around his eyes, the shadows beneath them that spoke of too many sleepless nights. "The legends say it happens between people who are meant to be bound," he said. "Not just as mates, though that can be part of it, but as partners, as two halves of something larger. It's the universe's way of saying, these two souls fit together." "But we don't know each other," Stella protested. "How can souls fit together if the people don't even know each other's real names?" Adrian flinched slightly at that, confirming her suspicion that Adrian wasn't his full name, or at least not the name most people knew him by. "The echo doesn't care about names or circumstances," he said. "It cares about essence, about who we are at our core." He paused, then added with brutal honesty, "And apparently, at our core, we're meant to find each other, even if the timing is terrible. Even if I have no right to drag her into my world." The thought drifted through Stella's mind unbidden, and she realized with a start that she could still hear him. Not constantly, not every passing thought, but the deep ones, the ones weighted with emotion. Those came through clear as bells. "I can still hear you," she whispered. "Your thoughts, the real ones. And I can hear yours." Adrian's amber eyes locked onto hers. The echo creates a connection, a bridge between souls. It can't be forced, and it can't be faked, which is why it's so rare, because it requires both people to be truly, genuinely open to connection, even if they don't realize it. Stella thought about the moment he'd knocked on her door, how she'd felt inexplicably drawn to let him in, despite every practical reason not to. How sitting across from him had felt comfortable in a way that made no sense for two strangers. Had she been open to connection? She'd spent 3 years building walls, keeping herself isolated, convincing herself that alone was better than vulnerable. But maybe, in some deep part of herself she'd tried to ignore. She'd been desperately, achingly lonely. Yes, her own thought echoed back to her. "Yes, you have been." And from Adrian, a matching echo. "So have I." Stella sank onto one of the bar stools, suddenly exhausted. "This is insane. I know. I don't even know who you really are." "I know that too. But I don't want you to leave." The admission hung in the air between them, vulnerable and terrifying. Adrian's expression softened, and he moved around the bar until he stood beside her, close but not touching, giving her space even as the soul echo hummed with awareness of his nearness. "I don't want to leave either," he said quietly, "even though I probably should, even though this complicates things in ways I can't begin to explain. Then don't explain. Not tonight." Stella looked up at him, and in the dim tavern light, his face seemed almost gentle. "Tonight, just stay. Have another drink. Tell me something true that isn't about magic or destiny or impossible connections." Adrian studied her for a long moment, and she felt something shift in him. A decision being made, a wall being cautiously lowered. "All right," he said. "One true thing." He settled onto the stool beside hers, and his shoulder was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "I haven't laughed, really laughed, in almost 2 years. And 5 minutes before I knocked on your door, I was thinking about how heavy everything feels. How tired I am of carrying weight I can't put down." The honesty of it struck Stella like a physical blow. She poured them both another measure of whiskey, hands steadier now, and slid his glass across to him. "My turn?" she asked. "If you want." Stella took a sip of her drink, letting the burn give her courage. "I left my pack because I fell in love with the wrong person. Someone who was promised to another. When it came out, I was the one blamed for it. Called a homewrecker, a temptress. Like I'd somehow seduced him against his will. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. So I ran. And I've been running ever since in one way or another. That wasn't your fault. The thought came through so fiercely that Stella's breath caught. She turned to look at Adrian and found him watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. You don't know that, she said. You don't know the whole story. I know enough. I know that you were hurt and blamed for someone else's choices. And I know that's wrong. They sat in silence after that, but it was different now. Less awkward, more companionable. Stella found herself relaxing degree by degree, her earlier panic fading into something that felt almost like peace. Can I ask you something? Adrian said eventually. You've earned at least one question. Why did you let me in? Really, you didn't know me. It was late. Every logical reason said to turn me away. Stella considered the question, trying to put into words something she barely understood herself. You looked like I felt, she said finally. Like you needed somewhere to just exist for a minute. Without pretending. Without performing. She traced the rim of her glass with one finger. And maybe part of me recognized that if I helped you, it would be like helping the part of myself that's still scared and running. Beautiful, came the whisper through the echo. She's beautiful, inside and out. Stella's cheeks warmed, and she knew he'd felt her reaction because his own face flushed slightly. This is going to take some getting used to, she muttered. The thought-sharing thing. We can learn to shield, Adrian said quickly. With practice, you can control what the echo picks up. Keep private thoughts private. What if I don't want to? The question surprised them both. Adrian's amber eyes widened, and through the echo, Stella felt a surge of hope so powerful it made her dizzy. What if, she continued, emboldened by whiskey and exhaustion and the strange intimacy of 2 a.m, what if this impossible, crazy thing is actually a gift? What if not having to pretend or hide or perform is exactly what we both need? You don't know what you're offering, Adrian said, but his voice was rough with want. If we don't learn to shield, you'll see everything. All my thoughts, my fears, my responsibilities, the weight I was just talking about. You'll feel it too. And you'll feel mine. Stella met his gaze steadily. My shame, my loneliness, my desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, I'm allowed to want something good. You are. You deserve everything good. The thought was so tender that Stella felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back, not quite ready to fall apart in front of this strange man who was somehow becoming less strange by the moment. I think, Adrian said slowly, that you might be the bravest person I've ever met. I'm really not. I'm terrified right now. That's what makes it brave. Being scared and choosing it anyway. They finished their drinks in silence, and Stella felt the night stretching around them like a protective cocoon. Outside, the city slept on, unaware that inside this small tavern, something momentous was beginning. Finally, when the clock on the wall showed nearly 3 a.m, Adrian stood. I should let you rest, he said. You must be exhausted. Stella was exhausted, but she also didn't want this strange, magical night to end. She stood as well, suddenly awkward now that it was time for him to actually leave. Will I see you again? She asked, hating how uncertain she sounded. Do you want to? Yes. The smile that crossed Adrian's face transformed it completely, made him look younger, lighter, like a man remembering what joy felt like. Then yes, he said. Tomorrow. I'll come by tomorrow evening if that's all right. We can talk more. Figure out what this means. I'd like that. He moved toward the door, and Stella followed, intending to lock it behind him. But when he reached the threshold, he turned back, and they stood close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his amber eyes. Thank you, he said softly, for letting me in, for listening, for not running screaming when the echo activated. Thank you for knocking. They stood there for a moment longer, and Stella felt the pull of the echo like a physical thing, urging her closer, promising warmth and understanding and an end to loneliness. But Adrian stepped back first, giving them both space. Good night, Stella, he said. Good night, Adrian. She watched him disappear into the darkness, and only when he was completely out of sight did she close and lock the door. The tavern felt emptier without him, but Stella's chest still held that strange warmth, that sense of a second heartbeat that wasn't quite her own. She looked down at the shattered glass she'd dropped earlier, the spilled whiskey now mostly evaporated. The practical thing would be to clean it up immediately. Instead, she found herself smiling, really smiling, for the first time in longer than she could remember, because tomorrow he would come back. And somehow, impossibly, that thought didn't terrify her. It felt like hope. Chapter 3. Morning came far too quickly, announced by sunlight that seemed determined to stab directly through Stella's eyelids and the enthusiastic crowing of Mrs. Henderson's rooster 3 buildings over, a bird that Stella was convinced had a personal vendetta against sleep. She groaned, pulling the thin blanket over her head, and immediately regretted the movement when her temples throbbed in protest. The whiskey. Right. She'd had more than her usual careful half-glass, sitting at the bar with a stranger who could somehow hear her thoughts. A stranger who was coming back tonight. That thought jerked her fully awake. Blanket forgotten, heart suddenly racing for reasons that had nothing to do with her mild hangover. Had last night actually happened? The soul echo, the impossible connection, the amber-eyed man who'd looked at her like she was something precious instead of something broken? Stella pressed her hand to her chest, half expecting to feel nothing but her own familiar heartbeat. Instead, that strange warmth was still there, faint in the morning light, but present, like an ember that hadn't quite gone cold. Real. It had all been real. "Oh no," she said aloud to her empty room. "Oh no, oh no, oh no." Because real meant she had to face him again tonight. Real meant she had to figure out what to wear and what to say and how to act around someone who could potentially hear every mortifying thought that crossed her mind. Real meant... A sharp knock on her door interrupted her spiral into panic. "Stella!" Old Greta's voice came through the wood, cheerful and far too loud for this hour of the morning. "You alive in there, girl?" Stella scrambled out of bed, nearly tripping over the boots she'd apparently abandoned in the middle of the floor, and opened the door to find her employer standing in the narrow hallway with a basket of what smelled like fresh bread and an expression of profound amusement. "You look terrible," Greta announced, pushing past her into the room without waiting for an invitation. The old woman moved with the confidence of someone who'd lived 70-some years and had long since stopped caring about things like personal boundaries. "Late night? We had a customer after closing," Stella said, which was technically true even if it left out about 90% of the important details. Greta's eyebrows, wild and gray and prone to independent movement, shot up toward her hairline. "After closing? You let someone in after you locked up? Stella, I taught you better than that. He was... polite. And he just wanted one drink." Greta settled herself on Stella's only chair, the basket of bread balanced on her lap, and fixed her with a look that had probably extracted confessions from much stronger people than Stella. This polite late-night customer wouldn't happen to have been tall, dark, and brooding, would he? With eyes like a wolf and enough presence to make the air shimmer. Stella froze in the middle of trying to make her hair look less like a bird's nest. "How did you see him?" Didn't have to see him to know. Greta pulled a roll from the basket and tore it in half, releasing a cloud of steam and the yeasty smell of fresh baking. "I felt the magic, girl. Even old and half-deaf as I am, I felt it activate. The whole building practically hummed with it around midnight." "The magic," Stella repeated faintly, sinking onto the edge of her bed because her legs suddenly didn't want to support her weight. "You know about the soul echo." Greta's expression softened into something almost gentle. "Known about it for 60-some years, since my own echo activated with my late husband. Felt his death through it, too, when the fever took him." She was quiet for a moment, lost in memory, then shook herself. "But that's old history. What matters is that yours activated last night, with a stranger no less, and you're sitting here looking like you're about to bolt." "I don't know what to do," Stella admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "He's coming back tonight, and I don't know who he really is. And he can hear my thoughts, Greta. My real thoughts. The messy, embarrassing, terrified ones. And you can hear his, I'd wager. Yes. Then you already know the most important things. Greta held out half the roll, and Stella took it automatically. You know if he's kind. You know if he's honest. You know what his heart looks like underneath all the pretending we do. That's more than most people get after years of courting. Stella bit into the bread, still warm, probably from Greta's early morning baking session, and chewed while she tried to sort through the tangle of her thoughts. The problem was that Greta was right. She did know things about Adrian. She'd felt his loneliness, his exhaustion, the weight he carried. She'd heard his kindness in the way he'd thought about her pain, but she'd also felt something else, something he was hiding, some enormous truth that pressed against the edges of the echo but never quite came through clearly. What if he's dangerous? She asked quietly. Oh, he's definitely dangerous, Greta said with a cheerfulness that was not at all reassuring. Man with that much power? That much magic just radiating off him? Absolutely dangerous. Question is whether he's dangerous to you specifically, and from what I felt last night, I'd say no. He's protective, possessive even, in the way wolves get about their people, but not cruel. How can you know that from just feeling the magic? Because the soul echo doesn't activate for cruel people, dear. It requires openness, vulnerability, a genuine capacity for connection. Greta stood, leaving the basket of bread on the chair. Cruel people can't manage that, no matter how they might want to. She crossed to the door, then paused with her hand on the frame. Wear the blue dress tonight, the one with the embroidery at the collar. It makes your eyes look like stars. Greta, and for heaven's sake, fix your hair. You look like you fought a windstorm and lost. Then she was gone, her footsteps creaking down the stairs, leaving Stella alone with a basket of bread and the disconcerting realization that her employer had just given her blessing to pursue a relationship with a mysterious stranger who might be dangerous. The day passed in a strange blur of normal tasks that felt anything but normal. Stella swept floors and wiped tables and helped Greta prepare for the evening crowd, all while hyper-aware of the warmth in her chest that pulsed like a second heartbeat. Several times she caught herself touching the spot over her heart, as if she could feel the echo through skin and bone. Around mid-afternoon, Greta's nephew Marcus came by with a delivery of ale from the brewery, and Stella made the mistake of being distracted when she opened the door. Stella, did you hear about the commotion in the market square? Marcus heaved a barrel onto the floor with a grunt. Apparently, some noble's carriage rolled right through Mrs. Patterson's vegetable stall. Cabbages everywhere. Absolute chaos. That's terrible, Stella said automatically, but her mind was elsewhere, specifically on whether the blue dress Greta had mentioned was clean, and whether she even remembered where she'd packed it. Marcus continued talking, apparently not noticing her distraction. And then, this is the best part, Mrs. Patterson's pig got loose and chased the noble down the street. I heard he climbed up on a fountain to get away, ruined his fancy coat completely. Despite herself, Stella laughed. Serves him right for running over her vegetables. That's what everyone said. The pig's a local hero now. Someone's talking about commissioning a portrait. A portrait of a pig? Why not? He's got more personality than half the nobles in this city. Stella was still smiling when Marcus left, and she realized with a start that she'd gone nearly 10 minutes without thinking about tonight. Without worrying about Adrian and the echo and all the impossible questions swirling in her mind. Maybe that was good. Maybe she needed to just let things happen. Stop trying to control and predict and protect herself from every possible hurt. The thought was terrifying. It was also possibly exactly what the echo was trying to teach her. By the time evening rolled around and the first customers began trickling in, Stella had worked herself into a state of nervous energy that had her jumping at shadows. She dropped a glass, thankfully empty, and nearly overcharged a regular customer by 3 copper pieces before Greta gently but firmly suggested she take a break. Go upstairs, the old woman said, steering her toward the back stairs with surprising strength for someone her age. Fix yourself up. He'll be here within the hour, mark my words, and you'll want to be ready. How do you know when he'll arrive? Greta tapped her nose. The echo pulls you together. He's probably been fighting the urge to show up early all day. Stella fled upstairs, grateful for the excuse to escape. Her room felt smaller than usual as she pulled out the blue dress, miraculously clean, neatly folded in the bottom of her trunk, and tried to make herself presentable. The dress was simple but well made, a gift from her mother before everything fell apart. The embroidery at the collar was delicate work, tiny silver threads forming patterns that looked almost like constellations. Stella ran her fingers over them, remembering her mother's patient hands guiding her through her first attempts at needlework. She was pinning up her hair and losing the battle with several stubborn curls when she felt it. That warmth in her chest suddenly flared, stronger than it had been all day, and with it came a whisper of emotion that wasn't hers. Nervous. She's going to realize I'm not worth the trouble. Adrian. He was close, maybe already downstairs. Stella abandoned her hair. Half up was going to have to be good enough, and pressed her hand to her chest. Without really thinking about it, she sent a thought back toward that warmth. I'm nervous too, but I'm also glad you came. The response was immediate, flooding through her with such intensity that she had to sit down on the edge of her bed. Glad doesn't begin to cover it. She made her way downstairs on legs that felt distinctly unsteady, and the moment she stepped into the main room of the tavern, her eyes found him. Adrian was sitting at the same stool he'd occupied last night, but everything about him was different in the lamplight and the bustle of evening customers. He'd changed clothes, wore a simple dark shirt and trousers that still somehow looked expensive, and his hair was tied back, revealing the strong lines of his face. And he was watching the door with an intensity that made her breath catch. When their eyes met, the soul echo sang between them, and Stella felt the moment he registered what she was wearing, felt his appreciation and something deeper, something tender that made her cheeks warm. Beautiful. She's so beautiful. Hi, she said, crossing to him, hyper-aware of every eye in the tavern that had just noticed their interaction. Greta's customers were good people, but they were also incurably nosy. Hi. Adrian's voice was rougher than she remembered, and his hands were clenched on the bar like he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. You look. That dress is. You can hear what I think about how I look, Stella said, aiming for teasing and landing somewhere closer to breathless. No need for words. That startled a laugh out of him, and the sound did something dangerous to her pulse. Fair point. Though for the record, what you think about yourself isn't nearly as flattering as what I think about you. Careful, or I'll make you say it out loud. I'll say anything you want if it keeps you standing this close. The flirting should have felt awkward. They barely knew each other after all. But the echo made it feel natural, like they were simply saying out loud what their souls were already communicating. I have to work, Stella said reluctantly, because Greta was giving her a significant look from across the room. But stay. We can talk when things quiet down. I'm not going anywhere. She believed him. More than that, she felt the truth of it through the echo, his absolute certainty that no force in this world could drag him away from her tonight. The next few hours passed in a strange duality. Stella moved through her usual tasks, serving drinks, wiping tables, making conversation with regulars who'd known her for years. But half her attention was always on Adrian. On the way, he tracked her movements with those amber eyes, on the quiet pride she felt through the echo whenever she handled a difficult customer with grace, or made someone laugh with a well-timed joke. She's magnificent. How did I get this lucky? The thought caught her off guard while she was pouring ale for old Mr. Finch, and she nearly overfilled his mug. Around 9 o'clock, a group of dock workers came in, already halfway to drunk and looking for trouble. The largest one, a man named Garrett, who had a well-deserved reputation as a brawler, zeroed in on Stella immediately. There's my favorite barmaid, he announced, his voice carrying across the entire tavern. How about a kiss with my ale, sweetheart? It was the same routine he pulled every few weeks, harmless but annoying. Stella had gotten good at deflecting him with humor and firm boundaries. But before she could respond, she felt a surge of protective fury through the echo so intense it nearly knocked her sideways. She turned to find Adrian on his feet, every line of his body radiating lethal intent, his eyes flashing with something that was definitely more wolf than man. The entire tavern went quiet. The lady, Adrian said, his voice soft and deadly, is not interested in your kiss. Suggest you keep your requests limited to beverages. Garrett was drunk, but he wasn't stupid. Something in Adrian's stance, or maybe the way the air around him seemed to shimmer with barely contained power, made him take a step back. Didn't mean any harm, Garrett muttered. Just joking around. Then joke about something else. The dock workers found a table in the corner and kept their comments to themselves after that. The other customers slowly returned to their conversations, but Stella could feel the speculation in the air. By tomorrow morning, the entire neighborhood would know that someone had claimed protective rights over her. She crossed to Adrian, who was still radiating tension, and placed a hand on his arm. The contact sent warmth spiraling through the echo, and she felt him start to calm. That was very dramatic, she said quietly. He disrespected you. He's drunk and stupid. I can handle drunk and stupid. You shouldn't have to. The fierce protectiveness in his voice, in his thoughts, made something in Stella's chest squeeze tight. When was the last time someone had defended her? When was the last time someone thought she deserved defending? Always, Adrian's thought came through clearly. You always deserve defending. You deserve everything good. You can't threaten my customers every time they're rude, she said. But there was no heat in it. Greta will ban you. Worth it. Despite everything, Stella laughed. You're ridiculous. You're magnificent. They stood there for a moment, his arm warm under her hand, the echo humming between them with contentment. Then Greta cleared her throat loudly, and Stella remembered she was supposed to be working. The rest of the evening passed without incident, and by the time Stella flipped the sign to closed and ushered out the last few customers, she was exhausted, but strangely happy. Adrian had waited patiently, nursing a single glass of whiskey and radiating a contentment through the echo that felt like coming home. When the door finally locked behind the last patron, Stella turned to find Adrian watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. So, she said, suddenly nervous again now that they were alone, we should probably talk about everything. Everything, Adrian agreed. Starting with the fact that I haven't been completely honest with you. Stella's stomach dropped. What do you mean? He stood, crossing to where she waited by the door, and the echo carried his nervousness, his fear that what he was about to say would drive her away. My name is Adrian, he said carefully, but it's not my only name. My full name is Adrian Thorne, and I'm not just passing through this city. He took a breath. I'm the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, and I came here because I needed to escape everything that title means for just a little while. The words hung in the air between them, and Stella felt the truth of them settle over her like snow. The Alpha King. She'd let the Alpha King into her tavern for a midnight drink, and then she'd accidentally activated a soul echo with him. Oh, she said faintly. That's quite the thing to leave out. Through the echo, she felt his terror that she was about to reject him. His certainty that once she knew the truth, she'd realize he was nothing but trouble and complications. But underneath that fear, she also felt something else. Hope. Desperate, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, she would see past the title to the man. Stella looked at him. Really looked at him. Saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight he carried in the set of his shoulders. Remembered the loneliness that had leaked through the echo last night. The bone-deep weariness of someone who'd forgotten what it meant to simply be himself. Were you ever going to tell me? She asked. Yes. Tonight. I swear I was. Adrian's hands clenched at his sides. I just wanted one night where someone looked at me and saw Adrian instead of the crown. One night where I could be just a man, not a king. And what are you now? Terrified, he admitted. Terrified that I've ruined this before it could even begin. Stella stepped closer, closing the distance between them, and placed her hand over his heart. Through the echo, she felt the truth of everything he'd said. The fear, the hope, the desperate wish to be seen. I'm angry you lied, she said quietly, or at least omitted truth. But I understand why. You do? I've been hiding too. Hiding what I am, who I was, running from a pack that decided I was trouble. She looked up at him. So yes, I understand wanting to be just a person instead of a role or a reputation. Relief flooded through the echo so powerfully that Adrian actually swayed. I'll tell you everything. Anything you want to know. No more secrets. Everything is a lot, Stella said. How about we start smaller, like why the Alpha King is wandering into random taverns at midnight? You want the honest answer? Always. Because I was lonely, Adrian said simply. Because I'd spent another day being diplomatic and strategic and making decisions that affect thousands of lives, and all I wanted was to talk to someone who didn't want anything from me, who wouldn't see the crown before they saw me. And you found that in a closed tavern with a barmaid who accidentally gave you soul-deep access to her thoughts. Best decision I've ever made. Stella laughed, and it surprised her how easy it was. How natural it felt to stand here with a king, the king, and joke about the impossible situation they'd stumbled into. This is insane, she said. You know that, right? Completely, utterly insane. I know. And complicated. So complicated. I know that too. And I'm still not sure I'm not dreaming this entire thing. Adrian smiled. That rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. Want me to prove you're awake? How would you— He kissed her. It was soft and careful and achingly gentle. And the moment his lips touched hers, the soul echo exploded between them with a rush of warmth and light and emotion so intense that Stella forgot how to breathe. She felt everything, his tenderness, his longing, his absolute certainty that this right here, was exactly where he was meant to be. And underneath it all, she felt her own truth echoing back, that despite the impossibility, despite the complications, despite every logical reason to run, she wanted this, wanted him. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Stella pressed her forehead to his chest and felt his heartbeat racing beneath her hands. Definitely awake, she managed. Adrian laughed, the sound vibrating through his chest, and wrapped his arms around her. And standing there in her empty tavern, held by a king who'd chosen her, Stella thought that maybe, just maybe, she was allowed to want something impossible. Chapter 4. Stella woke the next morning to the extremely disorienting experience of feeling someone else's thoughts before she was even fully conscious. She's still asleep. Should I wake her? No. Let her rest. She looks peaceful, like starlight in human form. Is that too poetic? Definitely too poetic. But accurate. She opened her eyes to find Adrian sitting in her only chair, which he'd pulled close to the bed, watching her with an expression somewhere between besotted and terrified. How long have you been sitting there thinking poetic thoughts about starlight? Stella asked, her voice still rough with sleep. Adrian had the grace to look embarrassed. I forgot you could hear that. And for the record, about 10 minutes. Maybe 15. Did you sleep at all? A few hours. On the floor. Stella sat up so fast her head spun. The floor? Adrian, why— Because you fell asleep on my shoulder after we'd been talking and I didn't want to leave, and your bed is extremely small, and it seemed presumptuous to climb into it uninvited. He said it all in one breath, words tumbling over each other. Also, I'm the Alpha King, and I've slept in far worse places during campaigns. Your floor is actually quite comfortable, relatively speaking. Through the echo, Stella felt the truth of his discomfort, both physical and emotional. He'd stayed because leaving felt impossible, but he'd also been hyper-aware of propriety and not wanting to push boundaries. You're ridiculous, she said, but her tone was fond. Next time, wake me up and I'll get you a proper blanket at least. Next time? The hope in his voice was almost painful. Well, you're clearly not getting rid of me now. The soul echo saw to that. She swung her legs out of bed, suddenly aware that she was still wearing her blue dress from last night, now thoroughly wrinkled. Also, you kissed me. That's very hard to take back. I have no intention of taking it back. Adrian stood, moving toward her, and the echo hummed with warmth. Though I should probably ask, where do we go from here? It was the question Stella had been avoiding since she'd woken up, because where they went from here involved complications she wasn't sure she was ready to face. He was the Alpha King. She was a barmaid hiding from her past in a human city. The gulf between those two realities felt insurmountable. Nothing is insurmountable if we face it together. The thought came through so clearly that Stella knew he'd meant for her to hear it. She looked up at him, at this man, this king, who'd spent the night on her floor because he couldn't bear to leave her, and felt something in her chest crack open. "I don't know where we go," she admitted. "I've never had a soul echo before. I've never had anyone look at me the way you do, and I've definitely never accidentally started a relationship with royalty. Technically, you started it by letting me into your tavern. Technically, you started it by knocking after closing time." "Fair point." Adrian reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The touch sent sparks through the echo. "How about this? We take it one day at a time. I'm staying in the city for another 2 weeks before I have to return to the capital for a summit I can't avoid. That gives us time to figure out what this is. What we are. 2 weeks," Stella repeated. It felt simultaneously like forever and nowhere near enough time. "Unless you want me to leave sooner. Or later. Or never. I'm flexible." He was rambling now, nervousness bleeding through the echo. Though never might cause some complications, so maybe not never. But later. Later could work. Stella kissed him before he could continue his spiral into anxious logistics. It was meant to be quick, a simple way to stop the flow of words. But the moment their lips met, the echo surged, and quick became impossible. This kiss was different from last night's careful exploration. This was heat and certainty, and the kind of wanting that made rational thought disappear. Adrian's hands came up to cup her face, and Stella fisted her hands in his shirt, pulling him closer, chasing the warmth that flooded through the echo like sunlight. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian's eyes had that golden glow that meant his wolf was very close to the surface. 2 weeks, Stella said firmly, trying to get her racing heart under control. "We have 2 weeks, and you're going to spend them here, with me, being Adrian instead of the king. I can do that. Good. Starting with breakfast, because I'm starving and you look like you haven't eaten since yesterday." "I haven't," Adrian admitted. "I forgot." "You forgot to eat." "I was too nervous about seeing you again." Through the echo, Stella felt the truth of it. The way his stomach had been in knots all day yesterday. The way nothing had seemed important except getting back to her. It should have been concerning. The intensity of what was building between them. Instead, it felt right. She grabbed his hand, lacing their fingers together, and pulled him toward the door. "Come on. Greta will have breakfast ready downstairs, and if we're lucky, she won't interrogate you too thoroughly about your intentions. And if we're unlucky, then you'll get to experience the full force of a protective elderly woman who's known me for 3 years and has opinions about men who show up at midnight." Adrian looked genuinely nervous, which Stella found unreasonably charming. Here was the Alpha King, who commanded armies and negotiated with foreign powers, terrified of meeting her elderly employer. They found Greta in the kitchen, surrounded by the organized chaos of morning cooking. The old woman took one look at them, at their joined hands and rumpled clothes and the way they kept glancing at each other, and smiled knowingly. "So," she said, cracking eggs into a bowl with practiced efficiency. "I take it the evening went well?" "Greta, this is Adrian," Stella said, deciding to skip past the part where he was royalty for now. "Adrian, this is Greta. She owns the tavern and has been basically family since I arrived in the city." "Ma'am," Adrian said, and Stella felt his genuine respect through the echo. "Thank you for taking care of Stella, for giving her a place to belong." Greta studied him for a long moment, her sharp eyes taking in details that most people would miss. Then she nodded, apparently satisfied by whatever she'd seen. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to the small table in the corner. "Both of you. You look half-starved and Stella's useless when she's hungry." "I'm not useless," Stella protested, but she was already sitting down, her stomach growling loudly enough to undermine her argument. They ate breakfast in comfortable chaos, Greta asking pointed questions about Adrian's business in the city, Adrian deflecting with just enough truth to satisfy without revealing his actual identity, and Stella mediating between them while trying not to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Through it all, The echo hummed between her and Adrian, a constant background warmth that made everything feel more vivid. She could feel his amusement when Greta made a particularly sharp observation, his contentment at being included in something as simple as breakfast, his wonder that this normal domestic moment, was something he got to have. I could get used to this, his thought drifted through, soft and longing. So could I, Stella responded without thinking. Their eyes met across the table, and something passed between them. An understanding, a promise. Whatever came next, they would face it together. After breakfast, Adrian reluctantly admitted he needed to return to his lodgings, a discreet inn on the other side of the city where he was staying under a false name, to change clothes and attend to at least some of his neglected responsibilities. "I'll come back tonight," he said, standing at the tavern door, still holding Stella's hand like he couldn't quite bear to let go. "If that's all right." "It's all right," Stella said. Then, feeling brave, added, "It's more than all right." The smile he gave her could have lit the entire city. She watched him disappear into the morning crowd, and only when he was completely out of sight did she allow herself to lean against the doorframe and process everything that had happened in the last 18 hours. She'd activated a soul echo with the Alpha King. She'd kissed him, twice. And unless she was very much mistaken, she was falling for him at a speed that should have terrified her, but instead felt inevitable. "You're smiling like a fool," Greta observed from behind her. "I know. He's a good man. Powerful but good. The echo wouldn't have activated otherwise. He's the Alpha King." Greta paused in her sweeping. "I suspected as much. The way he carries himself, the formal speech he forgets to hide when he's nervous." She resumed sweeping, apparently unbothered by the revelation. "Does it matter? Doesn't it? Greta, I'm nobody. I'm a runaway from a minor pack, working in a tavern, hiding from a past I'm ashamed of. He's royalty. He's a man who looks at you like you hung the moon. That matters more than titles. His court won't see it that way. Then his court can learn to see better." Greta stopped sweeping and fixed Stella with a firm look. "You've spent 3 years making yourself small, girl, apologizing for taking up space, accepting that you deserved the shame they heaped on you. But I've watched you build a life here. I've seen your kindness, your strength, your absolute refusal to give up even when things were hard. And I've never once thought you were nobody." Tears burned at the corners of Stella's eyes. "Greta, so if that boy, king or not, sees what I see, if the echo recognized you as someone worthy of a bond that rare and precious, maybe it's time you started believing it too." The rest of the day passed in a strange blur. Stella went through her usual tasks, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying moments from the night before, feeling the echo pulse gently in her chest, wondering what Adrian was doing and whether he was thinking about her too. He was. She could feel flashes of his thoughts throughout the day, soft and warm and tinged with anticipation for evening. Around mid-afternoon, something unexpected happened. Stella was wiping down tables when 3 women entered the tavern. Clearly, nobility based on their fine dresses and the way they carried themselves with that particular brand of entitled confidence. The leader, a woman with auburn hair piled in an elaborate style, looked around the tavern with barely concealed disdain before her eyes landed on Stella. "You," she said, her voice sharp. "We're looking for someone. A man. Tall, dark hair, amber eyes. Goes by the name Adrian. Have you seen him?" Stella's heart kicked into overdrive, but she kept her expression carefully neutral. "Lots of people come through here. Could you be more specific?" "He's the Alpha King," the woman said impatiently. "And he's been missing from his official lodgings for 2 days. His guards are frantic. If you've seen him, you need to tell us immediately." Through the echo, Stella felt Adrian's sudden spike of alarm. He'd felt her fear and was responding to it. She tried to project calm, hoping he'd understand she had the situation under control. "I'm sorry," she said politely, "but I don't make it a habit of tracking the movements of my customers, royal or otherwise. Privacy is important in this establishment." The auburn-haired woman's eyes narrowed. "Do you know who I am?" "No, ma'am. I'm Lady Cassandra, advisor to the crown. And if you're hiding the king—" "I'm hiding no one. Stella interrupted, letting a bit of steel into her voice. "But even if the king himself walked through that door right now, I wouldn't announce it to random strangers who barge into my workplace making demands. Now, if you'd like to purchase a drink, you're welcome to stay. Otherwise, I have tables to clean." Lady Cassandra looked like she'd swallowed something sour. "This isn't over," she said. "The king's absence is causing problems. When he's found, there will be consequences." She swept out, her companions following, leaving Stella alone with her racing heart and the echo broadcasting her distress loud enough that she knew Adrian could feel it. Sure enough, less than 10 minutes later, he burst through the door looking wild-eyed and dangerous. "Are you all right?" he demanded. "I felt the echo. You were afraid." Stella crossed to him, very aware that Greta and the few afternoon customers were watching with undisguised interest. She lowered her voice. "I'm fine. But we have a problem. Your people are looking for you. A Lady Cassandra and 2 others came by asking questions." Adrian's expression darkened. "Cassandra. Of course. She's head of my advisory council and absolutely furious that I disappeared without telling her exactly where I'd be. She seemed pretty determined to find you." "She always is." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration bleeding through the echo. "I'm sorry. I should have anticipated this. Should have left better instructions. I just wanted privacy." "I know." Stella touched his arm, and the contact helped calm them both. "But Adrian, if your court is looking for you, if there are responsibilities you're neglecting—" "Nothing that can't wait," he said firmly. "I told Cassandra I'd be unreachable for 2 weeks unless there was an actual emergency. She's just trying to control my schedule like she always does." Through the echo, Stella felt his certainty, and underneath it, the old exhaustion. The weight of always being needed, always being demanded of, never being allowed to simply exist. "Then we'll be careful," she decided. "You can still stay, but maybe be a bit more discreet about coming and going." "I can do discreet." "Can you really? Because you just ran in here looking like you were ready to fight anyone who'd threatened me." Adrian had the grace to look sheepish. "The echo makes it hard to stay away when you're afraid. It's like every instinct I have screams to protect you." "Noted. I'll try to be less afraid. Or I'll try to be less dramatically protective." "That seems unlikely." He laughed, and the sound eased some of the tension that had settled over them. "You're probably right." They spent the evening in the tavern again, falling into an easy routine that felt startlingly domestic. Adrian sat at the bar, helping where he could, though his attempts at washing glasses were clumsy enough that Greta eventually banned him from the task, and watching Stella work with an attention that would have been unnerving if it wasn't so warm. And through it all, the echo sang between them, weaving them closer together with each shared thought, each exchanged glance, each moment of understanding that needed no words. By the time Stella locked the door behind the last customer, she'd made a decision. "Come upstairs," she said, taking Adrian's hand. "Actually, sleep in a bed tonight instead of on my floor." "Stella?" "Just sleep," she clarified, though her cheeks warmed. "But together, because I sleep better when you're close, and I suspect you do too." Through the echo, she felt his gratitude and relief, and the kind of tender affection that made her heart ache. "Together," he agreed softly. "I'd like that." They curled up in her small bed, ridiculously cramped but somehow perfect, and Stella rested her head on Adrian's chest, listening to his heartbeat and feeling the echo settle into a peaceful rhythm between them. "Tell me something," she murmured, already half asleep. "Something true." Adrian's hand stroked gentle patterns on her back. "I've been the Alpha King for 8 years. In all that time, I've never felt as content as I do right now, in this tiny bed, in this cramped room above a tavern. This is what happiness feels like. I'd almost forgotten." Stella pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "We have 12 more days. Then I'll treasure every single one." And wrapped in warmth and certainty and the steady pulse of the soul echo, Stella let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, 12 days could be enough to build something worth fighting for. Chapter 5. The 5th morning of what Stella had started mentally calling the 2-week miracle began with the discovery that Adrian could not, under any circumstances, be trusted with breakfast preparation. She woke to the smell of something burning and bolted upright in bed, heart racing, only to find Adrian standing in the middle of her small room, looking deeply apologetic while holding a charred piece of what might have once been bread. "I was trying to surprise you," he said miserably, and through the soul echo, Stella felt his genuine distress at having failed such a simple task. "I thought, toast. How hard could toast be?" Stella pressed her hand over her mouth, trying desperately not to laugh. But it was a losing battle. Within seconds she was giggling helplessly, and Adrian's expression shifted from apologetic to indignant. "It's not that funny," he protested, though the corner of his mouth was twitching. "You're the Alpha King of the Northern Territories," Stella managed between giggles. "You command thousands. You probably make life-changing decisions before lunch, and you were defeated by bread. In my defense, your stove is temperamental. My stove is perfectly fine. You just—" She dissolved into laughter again, and through the echo she felt Adrian's embarrassment give way to reluctant amusement. "All right, fine," he conceded, setting the cremated toast on the table with exaggerated care. "I'm useless in the kitchen. Add it to the list of things I can't do." "What else is on that list?" Stella asked, climbing out of bed and crossing to where he stood. Even in the morning light filtering through her small window, even slightly rumpled and holding burnt toast, he was unfairly handsome. "Let's see." Adrian counted on his fingers with mock seriousness. "I can't make toast. I can't wash glasses without breaking them. Greta's banned me, remember? I can't walk through the market without someone recognizing me and bowing, which defeats the entire purpose of being discreet. And apparently, I can't stop staring at you like a lovesick fool, according to Marcus when he delivered the ale yesterday." The casual admission made Stella's heart skip, and she felt his sincerity through the echo. He really did find himself constantly distracted by her, constantly aware of where she was and what she was doing. "Well," she said, reaching up to brush a smudge of ash off his cheek, "at least you're good at other things." "Like what?" "Like making me laugh, and listening when I talk, and holding me when I sleep." She paused, then added with a small smile, "And kissing. You're extremely good at kissing." The heat that flared through the echo at her words made her breath catch. Adrian's amber eyes darkened, and his hands came up to rest on her waist with a gentleness that belied the intensity she could feel radiating from him. "That," he said, his voice dropping to something rough and warm, "is very good to know." He kissed her slowly, thoroughly, in a way that made the charred toast and the small room and the entire outside world fade into insignificance. The soul echo sang between them, carrying warmth and want, and something deeper that neither of them had quite found the courage to name yet. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Stella rested her forehead against his chest and tried to remember how to form coherent thoughts. "We should—" she started. "Yes. I don't even know what I was going to say." "Neither do I, but I agree with it." They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other and the gentle pulse of the echo, until a sharp knock on the door made them both jump. "Stella!" Greta's voice carried through the wood, cheerful and completely unrepentant about the interrupting. "Stop canoodling with your king and come help me with the morning deliveries. The fish merchant is being difficult again." Stella felt her face flame. "How does she always know?" "She's terrifying," Adrian said with genuine respect. "I'm fairly certain she has some kind of supernatural sense for these things. Either that or these walls are thinner than I thought." They made their way downstairs. After Stella had changed into a clean dress and Adrian had attempted to make his hair look less like he'd just rolled out of bed, with limited success, to find Greta in animated argument with a stocky man holding a crate of fish. "And I'm telling you, Bernard, those cod are not fresh," Greta was saying, hands on her hips in a posture that Stella recognized as dangerous. "They smell like they died of old age 3 days ago." "They're perfectly fresh," Bernard protested. "Caught this morning, same as always." "Then your boat needs better ice, because these fish are one step away from walking themselves back to the sea." Stella bit back a laugh and stepped forward to mediate, as she'd done countless times before. But before she could say anything, Adrian moved past her with an expression of polite interest. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the crate. Bernard looked suspicious, but handed it over. Adrian studied the fish for a moment, then lifted one and examined it with the kind of careful attention most people reserved for important documents. 3 days old minimum, he pronounced. Probably caught during the storm earlier this week and stored poorly. The flesh has that dull quality, and the eyes are clouded. Also, the smell is distinctive. Not rotten yet, but definitely past the point of fresh. Everyone stared at him. "What?" Adrian said, looking slightly defensive. "I grew up near the coast. My mother insisted I learn to tell good fish from bad. Said it was essential knowledge for—" He caught himself before saying something about ruling coastal territories, and amended, "for anyone who eats fish regularly." Greta looked delighted. "You see, Bernard? Even the boy can tell your fish are old." Bernard, thoroughly defeated, muttered something about bringing a better batch tomorrow and retreated with his questionable cod. The moment he was gone, Greta turned to Adrian with new appreciation in her eyes. "Useful skills you've got there, Your Majesty," she said, and Stella's heart nearly stopped. Adrian went very still. "I don't know what you— Oh, please." Greta waved a dismissive hand. "I've been around long enough to recognize royalty when it's standing in my kitchen making eyes at my barmaid. The question is whether you're good enough for her." Through the echo, Stella felt Adrian's panic give way to something else, a fierce, determined certainty. "No," he said quietly, "I'm not good enough for her. Not even close. But I'm going to spend every day trying to be." Greta studied him for a long moment, then nodded with satisfaction. "Good answer. Now, make yourself useful and help Stella with the flower delivery. Those sacks are heavy." The rest of the morning passed in comfortable chaos, with Adrian gamely attempting to help with various tasks and discovering new and creative ways to be terrible at them. He nearly dropped a sack of flour on his own foot. He managed to tangle himself in a fishing net that had been left near the door. And at one point, he somehow got his hand stuck in a jar while trying to retrieve a coin that had fallen inside. "How?" Stella asked, half exasperated and half laughing, as she worked to free him with soap and patience. "How is this even possible?" "I have large hands," Adrian said defensively, though through the echo she felt his embarrassment mixed with amusement at his own incompetence. "And the jar has a narrow opening. You're ridiculous. You say that, yet here we are. Clearly, I have questionable judgment." But she kissed him anyway, there in the kitchen with his hand still stuck in a jar, and through the echo she felt his joy, pure and uncomplicated and bright as sunlight. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Stella was wiping down tables while Adrian sat at the bar reading a book he'd brought from his lodgings, something dense about agricultural theory that he'd admitted was technically work, but interesting work. When a young woman burst through the door with the kind of energy that suggested either very good news or complete disaster. "Stella!" the woman exclaimed, and it took Stella a moment to place her. Mira, who worked at the bakery 3 streets over and occasionally came to the tavern for a drink after her shift. "Mira, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's wonderful. Or it will be if you can help me." Mira was practically vibrating with excitement. "You know my brother Thomas? The one who's been courting that girl from the milliner's shop? The one who writes terrible poetry? That's him. Well, he finally got the courage to propose, but he wants to do it romantically and he needs flowers. But the flower shop is closed because Mrs. Chen's daughter went into labor. And the proposal is supposed to be tonight. And—" Mira finally paused for breath, looking desperate. "Do you still have those climbing roses in the courtyard behind the tavern? The pink ones? Could we possibly cut some?" Stella felt Adrian's curiosity through the echo. He'd looked up from his book and was watching the interaction with interest. "Of course," Stella said. "Take as many as you need. Do you have something to cut them with?" "Oh, no, I didn't think—" "I'll help," Adrian offered, standing and crossing to them. "I'm decent with garden shears. Probably. Better than I am with toast, anyway." Mira's eyes went wide as she took in Adrian's full height and presence. and Stella felt a flutter of amusement through the echo. He knew exactly the effect he had and found it slightly mortifying. "This is Adrian," Stella said. "He's a friend. Adrian, this is Mira. She works at the bakery and makes the best cinnamon rolls in the city." "The second best," Mira corrected, still staring. "Mrs. Hemsworth's are better, but don't tell my boss I said that." She seemed to shake herself out of her daze. "Anyway, yes, help would be amazing. Thomas needs at least 24 roses, and he wants to arrange them in a heart shape, which is either very sweet or very cheesy. I haven't decided." They spent the next hour in the small courtyard behind the tavern, cutting roses and listening to Mira chatter about her brother's romance. Adrian worked with surprising efficiency, and Stella realized through the echo that he actually did know his way around garden plants. Apparently, his mother had insisted he learn basic horticulture along with the fish judging skills. "Your mother sounds formidable," Stella commented as Adrian carefully trimmed thorns from the stems. "She absolutely is. Terrifying and wonderful in equal measure." His expression softened with affection. She once stopped a border dispute by inviting both sides to dinner and refusing to let anyone leave until they'd worked it out. They were there for 3 days. That's brilliant. She's full of unconventional solutions. He caught himself before saying counsel, and amended, drives everyone around her slightly mad. But it usually works. By the time they'd finished, Mira had enough roses to create something appropriately romantic and dramatic. She thanked them profusely, pressing a small package wrapped in cloth into Stella's hands. "Cinnamon rolls," she explained, "from this morning's batch. Fair trade for the roses." After she'd gone, practically skipping with excitement, Stella and Adrian sat on the low wall of the courtyard, sharing the still warm cinnamon rolls and enjoying the late afternoon sun. "That was nice," Adrian said quietly, helping with something simple, something that matters to real people's lives. Through the echo, Stella felt what he wasn't saying. How much of his time was usually spent on matters of grand importance, on decisions that affected thousands, on things so large and complex they lost their human element. Helping a lovesick man propose to his sweetheart felt refreshingly small and genuine. "You're good at it," she said. "The helping. You listened to what Mira needed, you figured out how to solve it, and you didn't make her feel foolish for asking. That's just basic kindness. You'd be surprised how many people fail at basic kindness." Stella leaned against his shoulder, comfortable in a way that still surprised her. "It's one of the things She stopped, suddenly shy. "One of the things you what?" Adrian's voice was soft, encouraging. "One of the things I'm falling in love with," she admitted. "The way you care. About everything. About people you don't even know." She felt the sharp spike of emotion through the echo. Joy and wonder, and something that felt like relief, as if he'd been hoping she'd say exactly that. "Stella," he said, and his voice was rough with feeling. "I need to tell you something." "All right. I'm falling in love with you too. Actually, I'm pretty sure I'm already there. Have been since you opened the tavern door and looked at me like I was a person instead of a title." He turned to face her fully, amber eyes intense. "And I know we've only known each other 5 days. I know it's too fast and too much and probably completely insane. But the echo doesn't lie, and what I feel for you is—" Stella kissed him before he could finish, because sometimes words weren't enough and the soul echo was already singing with everything they couldn't quite articulate. When they finally broke apart, she kept her forehead pressed to his. "Too fast, too much, completely insane," she murmured. "And I don't care. I love you anyway." The smile that crossed Adrian's face was incandescent. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the courtyard, talking about everything and nothing. His childhood near the coast, her grandmother's stories about old magic, the terrible poetry that Mira's brother Thomas apparently wrote, the way the evening light turned the roses golden. And through it all, the soul echo hummed between them, weaving them closer together with each shared moment, each confession, each comfortable silence. As the sun began to set and the courtyard filled with long shadows, Adrian pulled Stella close and pressed a kiss to her temple. 9 more days, he said quietly. Then we'll make them count. That evening, the tavern was busier than usual. Apparently word had spread about the handsome stranger who'd been spending time with Stella, and curiosity brought in customers who usually went elsewhere. Stella found herself fielding questions with practiced diplomacy, while Adrian sat at his usual spot at the bar, radiating contentment through the echo. Around 8 o'clock, a commotion at the door drew everyone's attention. A young man, barely more than a boy, really, stumbled in carrying something wrapped in cloth, his face flushed with excitement. "Is there a Stella here?" he called out. "I've got a delivery." Stella raised her hand, confused. She wasn't expecting anything. The boy crossed to her and thrust the package into her hands. "From Thomas and his new fiancée." She said yes, by the way. "He wanted you to know that the roses worked perfectly, and this is to say thank you." He disappeared before Stella could respond, leaving her holding the mysterious package. She unwrapped it carefully to reveal a beautiful pie, still warm from the oven, with a note tucked on top. "Thank you for the roses. They made everything perfect. Thomas and Elena." "Well," Greta said, appearing at Stella's elbow with perfect timing. "Looks like your good deed came back around. That's Elena's famous apple pie. She wins the Autumn Festival competition every year." Stella felt unreasonably emotional about a pie, but through the echo, she knew Adrian understood. It wasn't about the gift. It was about being part of something good, about helping create a moment of joy that would ripple outward. They shared the pie that night after closing, sitting at the bar in the quiet tavern while Greta hummed to herself in the kitchen. It was perfect, sweet and tart and flaky, but Stella knew she'd remember the moment more for the way Adrian looked at her, like she'd hung the moon, and the way the soul echo wrapped around them both like a warm blanket. "I wish these 2 weeks could last forever," she said softly. "So do I." Adrian caught her hand, brought it to his lips. "But we still have 9 days. And after that," he paused, and through the echo she felt his determination. "After that, we figure out how to make this work. I'm not losing you, Stella. Not because of distance or duty or anything else." "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." And wrapped in the warmth of the echo and the certainty of his words, Stella let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, love could be enough to bridge any distance. Chapter 6, Day 7 of the 2 weeks dawned with rain. The kind of steady, gentle downpour that turned the city streets into rivers and kept most sensible people indoors. Which meant the tavern was packed by mid-morning with people seeking shelter and something warm to drink. Stella moved through the crowded room with practiced efficiency, balancing multiple mugs of hot cider and fielding good-natured complaints about the weather. Adrian had taken up residence at his usual spot at the bar, but today he'd been enlisted by Greta to help with food preparation, a decision everyone would later agree was either very brave or very foolish. "How?" Greta demanded, staring at the pot Adrian had just uncovered. "Did you manage to burn soup?" "I got distracted," Adrian admitted, looking genuinely baffled by his own incompetence. Through the echo, Stella felt his mixture of embarrassment and amusement. "I was watching Stella, and I forgot to stir, and then suddenly there was smoke." "Watching Stella," Greta repeated with exaggerated patience. "The soup burned because you were mooning over my barmaid. In fairness, she's very distracting. She's also going to laugh herself sick when she sees what you've done." Greta was right. When Stella came by to check on them and saw the pot of somehow charred soup, she had to press her hand over her mouth to contain her laughter. "I'm starting to think," she managed, "that you might be cursed when it comes to kitchens." "That's actually a possibility," Adrian said seriously. "There was an incident when I was 12 involving a temperamental cook and an accidentally ruined roast. She might have muttered something about me never making decent food in my life. You're telling me the Alpha King of the Northern Territories might be laboring under a kitchen curse from a cranky cook? It would explain so much." Their laughter drew the attention of nearby customers, and Stella realized with a start that people were watching them with open curiosity and approval. She'd been so caught up in Adrian, in the soul echo and their growing connection, that she'd almost forgotten they were developing an audience. "They like you," she murmured as she passed him with a tray of empty mugs. "The regulars. They've been asking me questions all week." "What kind of questions?" "Whether you're staying?" Whether your intentions are honorable, whether I've finally found someone who appreciates me properly." She felt her cheeks warm. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house asked if she should start planning a wedding. Through the echo, Stella felt Adrian's surge of possessive satisfaction at the idea, quickly followed by uncertainty. Because a wedding would mean facing the reality they'd been carefully avoiding, that he was the alpha king and she was a runaway barmaid, and there was no easy way to bridge that gap. Before either of them could dwell on it, the tavern door burst open with enough force to slam against the wall, and an absolutely drenched figure stumbled inside. "Stella!" The voice was familiar, and when the person pushed back their hood, Stella's heart stopped. It was James, from her old pack, the beta who'd been her closest friend before everything fell apart. "James?" She set down her tray with trembling hands. How did you— "I've been looking for you for 3 years, James said, water dripping from his clothes to pool on the floor. "Ever since you disappeared, and I finally tracked you here." He looked around the tavern, taking in the curious faces, before his eyes landed on Adrian. His expression shifted immediately, from relief to wariness. "Who's this?" Stella felt Adrian tense through the echo, felt his instinctive protective response to someone from her past appearing unexpectedly. She crossed to him, placed a hand on his arm in what she hoped was a calming gesture. "This is Adrian," she said carefully. He's important to me. Adrian, this is James. We grew up in the same pack." The two men studied each other with the kind of careful assessment that made Stella nervous. Through the echo, she felt Adrian cataloging James, his scent, his stance, his strength, and coming to some conclusion she couldn't quite read. "We should talk," James said, still looking at Adrian. "Privately, there are things Stella needs to know." "Then say them here," Adrian replied, his voice taking on an edge Stella had never heard before. "She's among friends. These aren't matters for human ears." "Then it's fortunate," Greta interjected smoothly, "that I'm about to close the tavern for a private event. Everyone out. Come back in an hour." There were grumbles, but Greta's word was law in her own establishment. Within minutes, the tavern had cleared except for Stella, Adrian, James, and Greta herself, who made it very clear she wasn't going anywhere. "Talk," Stella said, once the door had closed behind the last customer. "What's so important that you tracked me across 3 territories?" James ran a hand through his wet hair, looking uncomfortable. "Your exile has been lifted. The pack elders reviewed your case, actually reviewed it properly this time, and declared that you were unfairly blamed for what happened with Connor." Stella felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. "What?" Connor's mate finally told the truth, admitted that he'd pursued you, not the other way around, that you'd tried to reject him multiple times before he finally cornered you in a position that looked compromising. James's expression was grim. She'd known all along but stayed silent because her family had too much invested in the mating alliance. But her conscience finally got the better of her. Through the echo, Stella felt Adrian's fury. Ice-cold and tightly controlled, directed at people he'd never met for hurts they'd inflicted on someone he loved. "So I was blamed for something I didn't do," Stella said slowly. "Exiled from my pack, spent 3 years thinking I was the problem. And now they want me to just come back? The Alpha sent me personally. He wants to apologize. Make amends." James took a step closer. "Stella, you have a place there. You always did. Come home." For 3 years, Stella had dreamed of hearing those words, had imagined what it would feel like to be vindicated, to have her name cleared, to be welcomed back to the only home she'd known for most of her life. But standing here now, in this tavern that smelled like cider and wood smoke, with Adrian's presence solid beside her and Greta watching protectively from behind the bar, she realized something startling. She didn't want to go back. "No," she said quietly. James blinked. "What?" "No, I'm not coming back." Stella looked around the tavern, at the worn tables she'd wiped down 1,000 times, at the bar where she'd learned to pour a perfect drink, at Greta who'd given her a chance when no one else would. "This is my home now. These are my people. But Stella, I appreciate you coming all this way. I appreciate knowing the truth." She felt Adrian's hand find hers, their fingers lacing together, and drew strength from the contact. But I built a life here. A good life. And I'm not giving it up to go back to a pack that threw me away the moment things got difficult. What about family? Your mother's been asking about you. My mother, Stella interrupted, stood by and watched them exile me. She chose pack harmony over her own daughter. I haven't forgotten that. James looked stricken, and through the echo, Stella felt Adrian's approval mixed with concern. He was proud of her for standing up for herself, but worried about what this confrontation was costing her emotionally. There's something else, James said reluctantly. Something I was supposed to tell you only if you refused to come back willingly. A chill ran down Stella's spine. What? Connor's mate. She broke their bond. Left him. And now he's saying... James couldn't quite meet her eyes. He's saying that you were always meant to be his mate. That he's going to come here and claim you properly. The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. Through the echo, Stella felt Adrian's wolf surge to the surface. Possessive and territorial and absolutely lethal. He can try, Adrian said, and his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. But he'll find I have something to say about that. James's eyes widened as he apparently picked up on something in Adrian's scent or bearing. Wait. You're not just... He looked between them, nostrils flaring as he caught the mingled scent that marked them as bonded. The soul echo. You two have an active soul echo. We do, Stella confirmed. But that's permanent. That's a bond deeper than mating. James sat down heavily on the nearest chair. Stella, do you have any idea what you've done? Connor can claim you all he wants, but an echo bond supersedes everything. You're effectively untouchable to other wolves now. Through the echo, Stella felt Adrian's satisfaction. He'd known this, had understood the significance of what they'd created, and had been prepared to use it as protection if necessary. Good, Stella said firmly, because I don't want Connor. I don't want my old pack. I want this. She squeezed Adrian's hand. I want him. James studied them both for a long moment, then sighed. You're sure? Because once I tell the Alpha you're not coming back, that you've formed an echo bond with someone else, there's no going back. You'll be formally severed from the pack. I'm sure. And you? James turned to Adrian. Whoever you are? You understand what you're taking on? She comes with complications. A pack that treated her badly. A former suitor who apparently can't take no for an answer. And the kind of past that leaves scars. I'm aware, Adrian said calmly. And I'm not going anywhere. James looked at Greta, as if hoping for backup. She just smiled and started wiping down the bar. Young love, she said cheerfully. Always so dramatic. But these two have something real. Even an old woman like me can see that. Finally, James stood. All right, I'll tell the Alpha. But Stella, if you ever change your mind, you have people there who care about you, who'd welcome you back. I know. Thank you for telling me, for tracking me down. Stella crossed to him, gave him a brief hug. Be well, James. Have a good life. After he'd gone, still looking confused but accepting, Stella sagged against the bar, suddenly exhausted. That was intense, she managed. You were magnificent, Adrian said, pulling her into his arms. Absolutely magnificent. I just severed myself from my birth pack. You chose yourself. Your happiness. That's not something to regret. Through the echo, Stella felt his certainty, his pride in her, his absolute conviction that she'd made the right choice. It helped settle the churning mix of emotions in her chest. Well, Greta said, that calls for a drink. The good stuff, I think. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the closed tavern, sipping whiskey and processing everything that had just happened. Adrian told stories about his own complicated family dynamics, carefully edited to avoid revealing too much about his position, but honest about the pressures and expectations he'd grown up with. My mother used to say, he shared, that family is who shows up for you. Not necessarily who shares your blood, but who chooses to stand beside you when things get hard. Wise woman, Greta commented. Terrifying woman, Adrian corrected with a fond smile. But yes, also wise. As evening approached and Greta declared it time to reopen, Stella found herself thinking about choices, about how she'd spent 3 years running from her past, convinced she didn't deserve better, and how in the space of a week, everything had changed. She had Adrian, who looked at her like she hung the stars. She had Greta, who'd become more family than her blood relatives had ever been. She had this tavern, this city, this life she'd built from nothing. And most importantly, she had the courage now to choose it, to claim it, to stop apologizing for taking up space and start embracing the happiness she'd found. That night, after the last customer had left and the tavern was quiet again, Adrian pulled Stella into his arms and kissed her with a tenderness that made her chest ache. 8 more days, he murmured against her hair. And then what? Then we figure out how to make this permanent. How to build a life that works for both of us. He pulled back to look at her. I meant what I said earlier. I'm not losing you, Stella. Not to distance, not to duty, not to anything. We'll find a way. Through the soul echo, she felt his determination, fierce and unwavering, and let herself believe him. Because if there was one thing this week had taught her, it was that sometimes the impossible could become possible. Sometimes love was enough. And sometimes choosing yourself was the bravest thing you could do. Chapter 7. Day 9 of the 2 weeks arrived with unseasonable sunshine that turned the city golden and brought everyone out into the streets, with the kind of cheerful energy that only comes after days of rain. Stella woke wrapped around Adrian like a vine, her head tucked under his chin and his arms secure around her waist. The soul echo pulsed gently between them, content and warm, and so familiar now that she couldn't remember what mornings felt like before this connection existed. Good morning, beautiful. His thought drifted through her mind soft as silk, and Stella smiled against his chest without opening her eyes. Good morning yourself. Have you been awake long? Just watching you sleep and trying not to think about how we only have 5 days left. That made her eyes open. 5 days. Less than a week before Adrian had to return to his duties, his responsibilities, his world that had no obvious place for a barmaid from a human city. They'd been carefully avoiding the topic, living in a bubble of the present where tomorrow didn't exist, and complications could be ignored. But time was running out, and reality was pressing in from all sides. We need to talk, Stella said quietly, propping herself up on one elbow to look at him. In the morning light filtering through her small window, Adrian looked younger somehow, less like the powerful Alpha King, and more like a man who'd found something precious and was terrified of losing it. I know, he admitted. Through the echo, she felt his dread mixed with determination. I've been trying to figure out how to bring it up without ruining our last few days together. So instead, we just don't talk about it and pretend everything will magically work out? It's not my best plan, Adrian conceded, but it's been keeping the panic at bay. Despite the seriousness of the conversation, Stella felt a laugh bubble up. Here they were, facing an impossible situation, and he could still make her want to smile. All right, she said, sitting up fully and pulling the blanket around her shoulders against the morning chill. Let's actually talk about this. Really talk. No more avoiding. Adrian sat up as well, running a hand through his sleep-mussed hair, and Stella felt his nervousness spike through the echo. Whatever he was about to say, he was afraid of her reaction. The summit I have to attend, he began carefully. It's not optional. It happens once every 5 years, and every territory leader has to be there. It's where we renew treaties, settle disputes, establish trade agreements for the next cycle. How long will it last? 3 weeks, maybe 4. He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. And after that, I have to return to my territory, to my duties. I can't just abandon everything I'm responsible for. I would never ask you to, Stella said honestly. I know who you are, Adrian. I know what you've given up to be here with me these past 9 days. I wouldn't ask you to give up more. Relief flooded through the echo, quickly followed by frustration. But that leaves us with an impossible situation. Because I can't stay here permanently, and I can't ask you to come with me without... He cut himself off, but through the echo, Stella heard the thought he hadn't voiced. without offering her a position that would expose her to all the scrutiny and pressure I was trying to escape myself. "You're worried about me being your queen," Stella said softly. Adrian's eyes widened. "You heard that?" The echo's getting stronger. The deeper thoughts come through more clearly now. She squeezed his hand. "And you're right to worry. I don't know the first thing about being royalty. I'd be terrible at court intrigue and formal dinners and whatever else queens are supposed to do." "You'd be magnificent," Adrian said fiercely. "Just like you're magnificent here. Kind and clever and absolutely fearless when it matters. But I also know what that life costs. The constant scrutiny, the expectations, the way privacy becomes a luxury you can't afford." They sat in silence for a moment, both processing the weight of what lay between them. Through the echo, Stella felt Adrian's turmoil, his love for her warring with his protective instinct to keep her away from the complications of his world. "What if," Stella said slowly, an idea forming, "we don't try to solve everything right now? What if we just take it one step at a time?" "What do you mean?" "I mean you go to your summit. You do what you need to do. And then afterward, you come back here. We figure out what it looks like for us to be together across distance." She took a breath, gathering courage. "And maybe, eventually, I visit your territory. See what that world is like. Meet your terrifying mother." Adrian's laugh was surprised and genuine. "You want to meet my mother? I want to know all of you. The parts you show me here, and the parts that exist in your other life." Stella touched his chest, right over where the echo pulsed. "This connection, it doesn't care about distance or convenience. Maybe we shouldn't either." Through the echo, she felt his hope flare bright and fierce. "You'd really be willing to try? Even knowing how complicated it will be?" "Adrian, I was exiled from my pack for something I didn't do. I spent 3 years building a life from nothing in a city where I knew no one. I learned to tend bar, to live among humans, to be happy despite everything I'd lost." She met his amber eyes steadily. "I'm not afraid of complicated, and I'm not giving up on us just because easy isn't an option." The kiss he gave her was desperate and tender and filled with so much emotion that the soul echo sang between them like bells. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian pressed his forehead to hers. "I don't deserve you," he said roughly. "Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway." They spent the morning in bed, not sleeping, but talking. Really talking about the logistics of maintaining a relationship across territories, about how often Adrian could reasonably visit, about whether Stella could eventually learn to navigate court life, or if there was some other arrangement that would let her keep her independence while still being part of his world. It wasn't a complete solution. There were still too many unknowns, too many variables they couldn't control, but it was a start. A framework. A promise that they'd keep trying to make this work, no matter how improbable it seemed. Around noon, Greta's voice bellowed up the stairs. "Stella, stop canoodling with royalty and come help me. The lunch crowd's arriving and I can't manage alone." "She really does have supernatural timing," Adrian muttered, but he was smiling as they reluctantly disentangled themselves and started getting dressed. The tavern was indeed packed. Apparently word had spread that old Greta made the best meat pies in the city on Sundays, and half the neighborhood had turned up to claim one. Stella dove into the familiar rhythm of work, taking orders and delivering food and making small talk with regulars who'd become friends over the past 3 years. Adrian, wisely banned from any actual cooking, had been assigned to clearing tables, a task he performed with endearing awkwardness, still not quite used to the efficient movements required in a crowded space. Stella watched him nearly collide with Marcus, delivering ale, twice, and almost drop a tray of empty mugs once, before Greta took pity on him and reassigned him to stand there and look handsome, which you're much better at. "I'm not completely useless," Adrian protested. "No, dear, just mostly useless in kitchens and taverns," Greta said cheerfully. "But you're excellent at making Stella smile, so we'll keep you." Around mid-afternoon, when the lunch rush had finally subsided, a small girl, no more than 7 or 8, appeared at Adrian's elbow with the kind of determined expression that suggested she was on a mission. "Excuse me, mister," she said solemnly. "Are you Stella's sweetheart?" Adrian, to his credit, took the question seriously. He crouched down to be at her eye level. I'd like to be. Why do you ask? Because my mama says Stella deserves someone nice, and I wanted to make sure you're nice. The girl crossed her arms. So are you. I try to be. Do you think I'm succeeding? The girl studied him with the kind of intensity only children could manage. You have kind eyes, and Stella smiles a lot when you're here, so probably you're nice. She paused, then added, but if you make her sad, I'll tell my papa, and he's very big. Through the echo, Stella felt Adrian's amusement and genuine respect for this tiny guardian. That's fair. If I make Stella sad, I'll deserve whatever your papa does to me. Satisfied, the girl nodded and scampered back to her table, where her mother was trying very hard not to laugh. You've been vetted by a 7-year-old, Stella said, sliding up beside him. That's serious business in this neighborhood. I'm honored. Also slightly terrified of her papa, whoever he is. That's Mr. Chen from the apothecary. He's about half your size and wouldn't hurt a fly. But his daughter doesn't need to know that. They were laughing together when the tavern door opened and a figure stepped inside that made Adrian go completely still. The woman was striking, tall and elegant, with silver-streaked dark hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. She wore traveling clothes that were clearly expensive, and her eyes swept the tavern with sharp intelligence before landing on Adrian. There you are, she said, her voice carrying across the entire room. I've been searching the entire city for you. Through the echo, Stella felt Adrian's spike of panic followed by resignation, and underneath both, a deep well of affection. Mother, he said quietly, what are you doing here? The woman, the queen mother, Stella realized with dawning horror, crossed the tavern with purposeful strides until she stood directly in front of her son. Then, without warning, she pulled him into a fierce hug. You disappeared for 2 weeks without proper security, she said into his shoulder. You ignored 7 messages. You made your entire court frantic with worry. She pulled back, cupped his face in her hands. And you look happier than I've seen you in years, so I'm going to forgive all of it. Her eyes shifted to Stella, who was desperately trying to figure out if she should curtsy or run, or possibly both at once. And you, the Queen Mother said, must be the reason my son has been acting like a lovesick fool. Yes, that is... Stella gave up on coherent speech and settled for an awkward bow. Your Majesty, I'm Stella. I know who you are, dear. Adrian's been thinking about you so loudly that I could practically hear it from 3 territories away. She smiled, and it transformed her face from intimidating to warm. The soul echo is very chatty when one half of it is my son. Adrian made a strangled sound. Mother, you can't just what? Notice that my son has finally found someone who makes him happy? The Queen Mother turned back to Stella. I'm Mira, and I'm absolutely delighted to meet the woman who's captured my impossible boy's heart. Stella felt like the floor had tilted sideways. This was Adrian's terrifying, formidable mother, who was currently beaming at her like Stella had just presented her with the best gift imaginable. Thank you? Stella managed. Don't thank me yet. I'm about to make everything much more complicated. Mira looked around the tavern, spotted Greta watching from behind the bar, and brightened. You're the owner, yes? Wonderful. I need to borrow your back room for a private conversation. Family matters. Take it, Greta said immediately, apparently unbothered by royalty commandeering her space. But if you're going to yell at those two for being in love, I'm going to have opinions. Mira laughed, bright and genuine. I like you. No, I'm not going to yell. I'm going to help them figure out how to make this work. Because contrary to what my son thinks, I do occasionally solve problems instead of creating them. 10 minutes later, Stella found herself sitting in Greta's small back room with Adrian on one side and the Queen Mother on the other, trying to process how her life had become this surreal. So, Mira said, settling into her chair with the air of someone preparing to negotiate a treaty. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Adrian is the Alpha King. You're a barmaid. Society says that's impossible. I say society can learn to adjust. Mother, hush. I'm talking. Mira fixed Stella with an intent look. Do you love my son? Yes, Stella said without hesitation. And you understand what being with him means? The scrutiny, the expectations, the absolute circus that is court life? I'm starting to. Good. Honesty is important. Mira turned to Adrian. And you? You love her? More than anything. Then here's what we're going to do. Mira leaned forward, and Stella recognized the expression. This was a woman who'd spent years navigating complex situations and finding creative solutions. Stella, you're not ready to be queen. That's fine. It's a terrible job anyway. And Adrian could use someone in his life who isn't trying to use him for advancement. Thank you? Stella said, not sure if that was a compliment or not. So instead, you're going to come visit the Northern Territory. Not as Adrian's official partner, not yet, but as a guest. Someone he's courting properly, according to old traditions that give us time to figure things out. Mira smiled. And while you're there, I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about surviving court life. How to spot manipulators. How to navigate intrigue. How to be yourself while still playing the game well enough to win. Stella blinked. You want to mentor me? I want my son to be happy. And I haven't seen him this happy in 8 years. Mira's expression softened. Also, the soul echo is sacred. If it chose you two for each other, who am I to argue with ancient magic? Through the echo, Stella felt Adrian's overwhelming relief and gratitude. He'd been so afraid of having to choose between his duty and his heart, and his mother had just handed him a path that honored both. There will be challenges, Mira continued. The court will gossip. Some will oppose you simply because you're not nobility. But you have the echo, which is rarer and more powerful than any noble bloodline. And you have me, which means you have the protection of the Queen Mother. Anyone who wants to cause trouble will have to go through me first. The fierce protectiveness in her voice reminded Stella so much of Adrian that she almost laughed. I don't know what to say, Stella admitted. Say yes. Say you'll try. Say you'll give this impossible thing a chance to become possible. Mira reached across and took Stella's hand. I lost my maid 8 years ago. Watched my son close himself off from feeling anything because hurt was safer than hope. And then you came along and reminded him what it means to be happy. Her eyes were suspiciously bright. So yes, I'm going to help you. Because you gave me back my son. Stella looked at Adrian, who was watching his mother with an expression of pure love and exasperation. Your mother is terrifying, Stella sent through the echo. I told you, he replied. But his thought was warm with affection. She's also wonderful, and she's right. This could work. Okay, Stella said aloud. Yes, I'll try. Mira's smile could have lit the entire city. Excellent. Then let's discuss logistics. The summit is in 3 weeks. You'll come with us. Separately, of course, propriety and all that. I'll introduce you as a friend of the family who's visiting, and we'll take it from there. The rest of the afternoon passed in a whirlwind of planning. Mira had apparently come prepared with solutions to every possible obstacle, from where Stella would stay, guest quarters near the Queen Mother's own rooms, to how they'd explain her presence, old family friend, distant relation, take your pick, to what would happen with the tavern. Greta immediately volunteered to manage it, claiming she'd been running the place single-handedly for 40 years before Stella arrived. By the time Mira finally left, after extracting promises from both Stella and Adrian to have dinner with her tomorrow, Stella's head was spinning. That, she said, sagging against Adrian's shoulder, was the most intense conversation of my entire life. Welcome to having my mother as an ally. She's like a force of nature, impossible to stop, occasionally destructive, but ultimately beneficial. He wrapped his arms around her. I can't believe she came here. Can't believe she's helping us. She loves you. She loves me enough to support my happiness, even when it makes her life more complicated. That's actually everything. Through the echo, Stella felt the depth of his emotion. Gratitude and love, and a relief so profound it made her chest ache. That night, after the tavern closed and they lay tangled together in Stella's small bed, Adrian pulled her close and pressed a kiss to her temple, 5 more days here, he murmured. And then we start the next chapter. Together, Stella added. Always together. And wrapped in the warmth of the soul echo and the promise of a future that was still uncertain but no longer impossible, Stella let herself believe in happy endings. Chapter 8. The next 4 days passed in a blur of preparations and goodbyes and moments that Stella tried desperately to memorize, as if she could preserve them like flowers pressed between pages. On day 10, Mira returned with a dressmaker in tow, insisting that Stella needed proper traveling clothes for the journey north. The dressmaker, a cheerful woman named Rosa, who seemed completely unfazed by the presence of royalty, took measurements while chattering about the latest fashions and offering opinions on what colors would suit Stella best. Blues and silvers, Rosa declared, eyeing Stella critically, to match those gorgeous eyes. And we'll need warm fabrics. The Northern Territory gets cold this time of year, even with spring coming. Stella stood still while Rosa worked, feeling surreal about the entire situation. A week and a half ago, she'd been a barmaid with no prospects beyond her next shift. Now she was being fitted for clothes to visit the Alpha King's court. Stop overthinking, Mira said from her position in Stella's only chair. I can see your brain spiraling from here. I'm not. You absolutely are. You're thinking about how you don't belong, how you're going to embarrass yourself, how everyone will see through you. Mira smiled knowingly. I thought the same things when I married into royalty. I was a merchant's daughter who happened to catch an alpha prince's eye. The court was convinced I'd fail spectacularly. Did you? Oh, constantly. At first. Mira laughed at the memory. I used the wrong fork at formal dinners. I called a visiting duke by the wrong title. I once accidentally insulted an ambassador's wife by complimenting her dress. Turns out the color I praised was considered mourning wear in her culture. Stella couldn't help but smile. What did you do? I apologized sincerely, learned from the mistakes, and eventually stopped caring whether I was perfect and started caring whether I was genuine. Mira leaned forward. That's the secret, Stella. They expect you to be polished and perfect and politically savvy. So instead, be honest. Be kind. Be yourself. It's the one thing they'll never know how to counter. On day 11, Adrian took Stella to the market, properly this time, without worrying about being discreet. They wandered through stalls selling everything from fresh bread to hand-carved trinkets, and Adrian bought her a silver bracelet engraved with symbols she didn't recognize. Old wolf runes, he explained, fastening it around her wrist. They mean chosen heart. I know it's sentimental and probably too much for only knowing you for 11 days, but Stella kissed him before he could finish the self-deprecating spiral. When they broke apart, she touched the bracelet reverently. It's perfect, she said. Thank you. They spent the afternoon exploring parts of the city Stella had never seen. The Gardens district where wealthy families maintained elaborate grounds. The artists' quarter where street performers juggled fire and sang for coins. The quiet temple district where different faiths maintained peaceful coexistence. And through it all, the soul echo hummed between them, carrying warmth and contentment, and the bittersweet knowledge that their time in this bubble was running out. On day 12, disaster struck in the form of burnt pastries and a kitchen fire that was definitely not Stella's fault, mostly. It started when she decided to surprise Adrian with breakfast in bed. A simple plan that should have been foolproof, except that Stella got distracted reading a note from Rosa about the finished dresses, and forgot about the pastries in the oven until smoke started billowing from the kitchen. She rushed to rescue them, yanked open the oven door, and somehow managed to knock over a jar of cooking oil in the process. The oil hit the hot stove, ignited immediately, and suddenly there were actual flames reaching toward the ceiling. "Fire!" Stella yelled, grabbing the nearest cloth to smother it. Adrian came running, took in the situation with admirable calm, and immediately grabbed a bucket of sand that Greta kept by the hearth for exactly these emergencies. Within seconds, the fire was out, leaving behind only smoke and the acrid smell of burnt everything. They stood there, both breathing hard, covered in soot, and staring at the disaster zone that had been the kitchen. "So," Adrian said finally, I'm not the only one who's cursed in kitchens. Stella started laughing. Helpless, slightly hysterical laughter that Adrian joined after a moment. They collapsed against each other, still covered in soot, laughing until tears streamed down their faces while Greta appeared in the doorway and surveyed the damage with a long-suffering expression. I'm banning both of you from unsupervised cooking, she declared. Permanently. For the safety of my tavern and possibly the entire city. On day 13, their last full day before Adrian had to leave for the summit, they spent every possible moment together, walking through the city at dawn before anyone else was awake, sitting in the small courtyard behind the tavern, sharing a lunch that Greta had prepared, with strict instructions not to attempt any cooking themselves, talking about everything and nothing while the hours slipped away too quickly. As evening approached, Adrian pulled Stella into the now empty tavern. Greta had mysteriously declared a need to visit her sister across town, and led her to the center of the room. Dance with me, he said softly. There's no music. We don't need music. So they swayed together in the quiet tavern, wrapped around each other, the sole echo providing its own melody. Stella rested her head against Adrian's chest and listened to his heartbeat, steady and sure, and perfectly synchronized with her own. I'm going to miss this, she whispered. These 2 weeks. This bubble where we could just be us. We'll have it again, Adrian promised. Maybe not exactly like this, but we'll find our moments. I'll make sure of it. Through the echo, she felt his determination, fierce and unwavering. He meant it. Every word. That night, they lay tangled together in Stella's bed for the last time, neither of them sleeping, both trying to memorize the feeling of this closeness. Tomorrow changes everything, Stella said quietly. Tomorrow we start building something that lasts, Adrian corrected. Not a bubble, but a foundation. I'm scared. So am I. He tightened his arms around her. But I'm also hopeful, because we have the echo. We have each other. And we have my terrifying mother on our side, which is honestly better than having an army. Stella laughed, despite the tears threatening to spill over. She really is terrifying. Wait until you see her negotiate with recalcitrant nobles. It's like watching a predator play with her food. They talked until the first light of dawn crept through the window, painting the small room in shades of gold and rose. And when Adrian finally kissed her goodbye, a kiss that tasted like promises and hope, and the beginning of something neither of them fully understood yet, Stella felt the soul echo surge between them with absolute certainty. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The journey to the Northern Territory took 3 days by carriage, a luxurious vehicle that made Stella's previous travel experiences look laughable. Mira had insisted they travel together, with Adrian following a day behind to maintain the pretense that they'd met by chance at the summit rather than being already connected. Propriety is tedious, Mira said cheerfully as their carriage rolled through changing landscapes, but occasionally useful. Let the court gossip about a mysterious guest of mine rather than immediately connecting you with Adrian. It buys us time to establish you as someone worthy of their respect before they learn about the echo. Stella watched the scenery change from the familiar streets of her city to rolling farmland, then to forests of pine and birch that grew denser as they traveled north. The air grew colder, sharper, and she wrapped herself in one of the beautiful warm cloaks Rosa had provided. Through the soul echo, she felt Adrian's constant presence. Even across distance, the connection remained. She could sense his restlessness, his impatience to reach their destination, his worry for her comfort and safety. I'm fine, she sent through the bond. Your mother is taking excellent care of me. His relief came through warm and immediate. She likes you. She told me last night that you have excellent instincts and a spine of steel. That's high praise from her. I'm terrified of disappointing her. Impossible. You're you. That's all she asks. On the second day, they passed through a small village where people came out to wave at the Queen Mother's carriage. Mira waved back graciously, and Stella marveled at the easy way she connected with her people. Not condescending, but genuinely warm. They love you, Stella observed. I work at it, Mira said honestly. Being nobility is a responsibility, not just a privilege. These people trust us to protect them, to lead fairly, to care about their well-being. The moment we forget that, we lose the right to rule. It was a philosophy Stella suspected Adrian shared, based on everything she'd learned about him. The thought made her feel slightly better about entering his world. If this was the foundation it was built on, maybe she could find a place in it. On the third day, they crested a hill, and Stella got her first glimpse of the Northern Territory's capital city. It sprawled across a valley like something from a dream. Stone buildings with peaked roofs, wide streets that spoke of careful planning, and at the center, rising above everything else, the castle. It was beautiful and imposing in equal measure, all towers and battlements and flags snapping in the crisp northern wind. "Home," Mira said with unmistakable affection. "What do you think?" "It's magnificent," Stella breathed. "And absolutely terrifying." "Good. That means you're smart enough to respect what you're walking into." Mira patted her hand. "But remember, you're not walking into it alone. You have the Echo, you have Adrian, and you have me. Anyone who wants to hurt you will have to go through all three of us first." The carriage rolled through the city gates, and Stella felt the weight of curious eyes on them. People stopped in the streets to bow, to wave, to catch a glimpse of the Queen Mother returning from her mysterious trip. And somewhere in the castle ahead, Stella knew Adrian was already there, waiting for her, counting the hours until they could be together again. The soul echo pulsed warm and sure in her chest. Almost there, she sent through the bond. "I'm ready," came his immediate response. "Are you?" Stella looked at the castle looming closer, thought about everything that waited for her there, challenges and scrutiny, and a future she couldn't fully predict. But she also thought about amber eyes and gentle hands and a love that had bloomed impossibly fast, but felt more real than anything she'd ever known. "I'm ready," she sent back. "Let's do this." And as the carriage rolled through the castle gates into a new chapter of her life, Stella chose to believe in the impossible. One more time. Chapter 9. The guest quarters Mira had arranged for Stella were more luxurious than anywhere she'd ever stayed in her entire life. And also, she discovered within the first hour, came with an alarming number of servants who seemed determined to help her with tasks she'd been doing perfectly well by herself for 26 years. "I can brush my own hair," Stella protested gently as a young woman named Lydia reached for the silver-backed brush on the vanity. "But madam, it's my job to—" "I know, and I appreciate it truly. But I'll feel much more comfortable if I can maintain some independence." Stella softened the words with a smile. "How about you help me understand what I'm supposed to wear to dinner tonight instead? I have no idea what's appropriate for dining with the Queen Mother." Lydia's face brightened immediately. "Oh, well, Lady Mira prefers relaxed formality for private dinners. The blue dress with the silver embroidery would be perfect. Elegant, but not overdone." They spent the next 20 minutes in companionable conversation, while Lydia helped Stella navigate the wardrobe Rosa had created. Through it all, the soul echo pulsed gently in Stella's chest, carrying Adrian's constant awareness of her presence in the castle. "How are you settling in?" His thought drifted through, warm with concern. "Your castle has too many rooms and too many people who want to brush my hair," Stella sent back. "But the view from my window is beautiful." She felt his amusement ripple through the bond. "Wait until you see the gardens. I'll show you tomorrow, if you'd like." "I'd like that very much." Dinner that evening was mercifully private. Just Stella, Mira, and a surprisingly relaxed Adrian, who'd apparently snuck into his mother's quarters through a servant's passage to avoid the formal protocols that would have required him to greet Stella as an official guest. "This is absurd," he'd said, when Mira raised an eyebrow at his informal entrance. We have the soul echo. Everyone's going to know eventually." "Eventually, yes, but not tonight." Mira gestured for them both to sit. "Tonight, we eat, we talk, we prepare Stella for what's coming, and we don't give the court gossips anything to work with until we're ready." The meal was delicious. Roasted chicken with herbs Stella didn't recognize. Vegetables that somehow tasted sweeter than anything from the city markets, and bread so fresh it was still warm from the ovens. They ate while Mira outlined her strategy for introducing Stella to court life. The summit officially begins in 4 days, she explained, which gives us time to establish you as my guest before the chaos descends. Tomorrow, I'll introduce you to the key members of our household, the people you can trust. The day after, we'll attend a small gathering so you can practice navigating social situations with lower stakes. And if I mess up? Stella asked. Then you apologize gracefully and move forward. Everyone makes mistakes, Stella. The difference between someone who survives court and someone who drowns is whether you let the mistakes define you or learn from them. Through the echo, Stella felt Adrian's pride in his mother, and his deep gratitude that she was taking Stella under her wing. The next morning brought Stella's first real test when Mira took her on a tour of the castle that turned into a series of unexpected introductions. First was Marcus, the head of household staff, a dignified older man who looked Stella over with sharp eyes, before apparently deciding she passed some internal test. "Any friend of Lady Mira is welcome here," he said with a small bow. "If you need anything at all, you have only to ask." Then came Elena, the master of the kitchens, a formidable woman with flour-dusted hands and a no-nonsense attitude who took one look at Stella and declared, "You're too thin. We'll fix that." And finally, Commander Soren, head of the castle guard, a scarred wolf in his 50s who studied Stella with professional interest before saying, "You carry yourself like someone who's used to being aware of your surroundings. Good instincts. I worked in a tavern for 3 years," Stella explained. "You learn to watch for trouble." Soren's expression warmed with approval. Tavern skills translate surprisingly well to court. Both require reading people and diffusing situations before they escalate. By midday, Stella's head was spinning with names and faces and protocols, but she also felt something unexpected, a sense of being welcomed. These weren't people judging her for being a barmaid or questioning her worth. They were people who respected Mira's judgment enough to give Stella a genuine chance. That afternoon, Adrian made good on his promise to show her the gardens. They walked through carefully maintained paths lined with early spring flowers, and Adrian pointed out his favorite spots: the fountain where he used to play as a child, the hidden bench where he'd retreat when court life became overwhelming, the ancient oak tree his father had planted the year he was born. "It's beautiful here," Stella said, breathing in the scent of earth and growing things. "Peaceful. It is now. During the summit, it'll be chaos, visiting dignitaries, formal ceremonies, everyone vying for attention and advantage." Adrian's expression turned serious. "I need to warn you about something." Through the echo, Stella felt his concern. "What?" "There's a woman, Lady Cassandra. She's been persistent about trying to arrange a match between me and her niece. When she learns about you, about us, she's going to be difficult." "How difficult?" "She'll try to undermine you. Subtle things. Comments about your background, questions about your suitability, attempts to make you feel out of place." Adrian stopped walking and turned to face her. "I'm telling you this not to scare you, but so you're prepared. She can't actually do anything to hurt us. The soul echo supersedes any political maneuvering, but she can make things uncomfortable." Stella thought about the women from her old pack who'd spread rumors about her, about the way they'd twisted truth into weapon. She'd survived that. She could survive this. "I can handle uncomfortable," she said firmly, "especially if I have you and your terrifying mother backing me up." Adrian's laugh was surprised and delighted. "You're going to do wonderfully here." The small gathering Mira had mentioned turned out to be a tea party with about 15 noble ladies, all of whom were clearly dying of curiosity about the mysterious guest the Queen Mother had brought home. Stella wore one of Rosa's creations, a soft gray dress that somehow made her look elegant without trying too hard, and reminded herself to breathe as Mira made introductions. "This is Stella," Mira said warmly, "a dear friend who's visiting from the Southern Territories. She's been kind enough to keep me company during my travels." The questions came immediately, polite but probing. Where was Stella from? What did her family do? Had she traveled much? What did she think of the Northern Territory so far? Stella answered honestly, following Mira's advice to be genuine rather than trying to craft a perfect persona. Yes, she was from a small pack originally. No, she didn't have grand connections. Yes, she'd spent the last 3 years working in a tavern, And no, she wasn't ashamed of it. Most of the ladies seemed charmed by her honesty. But Stella noticed one woman, elegant and sharp-eyed, with auburn hair elaborately styled, watching her with undisguised skepticism. Lady Cassandra had to be. Sure enough, when there was a lull in conversation, Cassandra spoke up with honeyed venom. "How fascinating that you've worked in a tavern. Such a colorful experience. Tell me, do you find castle life terribly different? The protocols must be quite overwhelming for someone of your background." The implication was clear. You don't belong here. Stella felt anger spike through the soul echo. Adrian, listening from wherever he was in the castle, had heard the insult. But before she could respond, Mira cut in smoothly. "Actually, Cassandra, I've found that Stella has excellent instincts for navigating complex social situations. Managing a busy tavern requires diplomacy, quick thinking, and the ability to read people, all skills that translate remarkably well to court life." She smiled, sharp as a blade. "Unlike, say, being born into privilege and assuming that's enough to carry one through." Several ladies hid smiles behind their teacups. Cassandra's face tightened, but she said nothing more. The rest of the gathering passed without incident, and when it finally ended, Stella found herself cornered by 3 younger ladies who wanted to know everything about tavern life. "Is it true that people sing drinking songs?" one asked breathlessly. "Sometimes, usually off-key and after too much ale. And you had to break up fights?" "Occasionally, mostly you learn to spot trouble before it starts and redirect it." They seemed to find this endlessly fascinating, and Stella realized with some amusement that she'd accidentally made herself interesting by being completely herself. That evening, Adrian appeared at her quarters, properly announced by Lydia this time, and pulled her into a fierce hug the moment they were alone. "I felt what Cassandra said," he growled into her hair. "I wanted to— I know, I felt your anger through the echo." Stella pulled back to look at him. "But your mother handled it perfectly. And honestly, I've dealt with worse. Cassandra's just afraid I'm going to disrupt her plans." "Her plans don't matter. The only thing that matters is us." They spent the evening curled together on the window seat in Stella's sitting room, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and talking about everything that had happened that day. Through the soul echo, they shared thoughts and feelings too complex for words. Adrian's pride in how well she'd handled herself. Stella's growing confidence that maybe she could find a place in this world. Their mutual certainty that whatever challenges came, they'd face them together. The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Mira coached Stella on court protocols: who to greet first, how to navigate formal dinners, what topics were safe for small talk and which ones were political minefields. Adrian showed her more of the castle, introducing her to people he trusted and creating a network of allies who would support her. And through it all, the soul echo grew stronger. Stella found she could sense Adrian's location in the castle without trying, could feel his emotional state even when they were rooms apart. It was intimate and strange and wonderful all at once. On the morning the summit was set to begin, Mira appeared at Stella's quarters with a dress that made her gasp. It was midnight blue, the color of the sky just before full dark, with silver embroidery that caught the light like stars. The cut was elegant but comfortable, designed to move with her rather than restrict her. "For tonight," Mira said. "The opening ceremony. You'll sit with me in the gallery. Not in a position of prominence, but visible. People will ask questions. Let them wonder. And Adrian will be performing his duties as Alpha King, greeting guests, giving the formal welcome, being appropriately regal." Mira smiled. "But I guarantee he'll be looking for you in the crowd." That evening, Stella stood in the Great Hall, transformed for the summit with banners representing every territory, flowers from each region's homeland, and enough candles to turn night into day, and watched Adrian command the room. He was magnificent. Gone was the slightly awkward man who couldn't make toast without burning it. In his place stood the Alpha King, powerful and confident, welcoming leaders from across the continent with perfect diplomacy. But when his eyes found her in the gallery, when the soul echo pulsed warm between them, Stella saw past the crown to the man underneath, the one who was hers, completely and utterly, regardless of titles or protocols. "You're beautiful," his thought drifted through. "So are you. Very regal. I'd rather be with you than doing this." "Liar. You're good at this. I can feel how much you care about making everyone feel welcome." His surprise rippled through the bond, followed by warmth. "You see me? The real me. That's everything." The ceremony continued, and Stella watched dignitaries parade past, each one greeted with perfect courtesy. She was so focused on Adrian that she almost missed it when a familiar figure stepped forward from the southern delegation. Connor, from her old pack, the man who'd claimed she was meant to be his mate. He looked different, harder, colder, with an edge that hadn't been there 3 years ago. And when his eyes swept the gallery and landed on Stella, the hatred in them made her blood run cold. Through the soul echo, she felt Adrian's instant alarm. He'd seen Connor's expression, had felt Stella's fear, and was already moving. But before anything could happen, Connor bowed formally to Adrian and moved on, disappearing into the crowd of visitors. Stella's hands were shaking. Mira appeared at her elbow, steady and sure. "That's him?" the Queen Mother asked quietly. "Yes. Then we'll deal with him. Together. But not tonight." Mira squeezed her hand. "Tonight, we simply remember that he has no power here. You're under my protection. And anyone who threatens that will answer to me." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Stella made polite conversation with the ladies around her, smiled appropriately, and did everything expected of an unimportant guest. But inside, her heart raced with the knowledge that Connor was here, in the castle, and whatever came next wouldn't be easy. When she finally retreated to her quarters hours later, she found Adrian waiting. Propriety be damned. "Are you all right?" he demanded, pulling her into his arms. "Scared," she admitted into his chest. "But safe. With you, I'm safe. Always. I promise. Always." And wrapped in his embrace, with the soul echo singing between them, Stella chose to believe him. Chapter 10. The morning after the opening ceremony dawned gray and heavy with the promise of rain. Stella woke to find a note slipped under her door in Mira's elegant handwriting. "Connor has requested a formal audience. I've scheduled it for this afternoon with myself and Adrian present. You don't have to face him alone." Stella's stomach churned as she dressed, but she also felt a strange calm settling over her. For 3 years, she'd run from this confrontation. Maybe it was time to face it head-on. The audience chamber was smaller than the Great Hall, but no less impressive, with tall windows that let in the watery morning light and walls lined with tapestries depicting the Northern Territory's history. Mira sat in a high-backed chair with Adrian standing beside her, and Stella took her place slightly behind them, visible but not in a position of authority. When Connor was shown in, he looked around the room with barely concealed contempt before his eyes landed on Stella. The hatred there was even clearer than it had been the night before. "Alpha King," Connor said, bowing with just slightly less respect than was appropriate. "Queen Mother, thank you for granting this audience." "State your business," Adrian said, and his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "I've come to claim what's rightfully mine." Connor's gaze fixed on Stella. "That woman, she was promised to me by her pack's elders before she fled. I'm here to take her home." Stella felt ice flood her veins, but before she could speak, Mira laughed, bright and utterly dismissive. "Promised to you? How fascinating." The Queen Mother leaned forward. "Do you have documentation of this promise? A contract signed by both families? Any proof whatsoever of this alleged arrangement?" Connor's jaw tightened. "It was a verbal agreement. Then it's worth exactly nothing." Mira waved a dismissive hand. "Verbal agreements without the woman's consent are not recognized in the Northern Territory. We have laws against such things. With respect, Queen Mother, her consent isn't required. Pack law supersedes." "Pack law," Adrian interrupted, and his voice had gone very quiet and very dangerous, "does not supersede the laws of my territory. And you've just admitted to attempting to claim a woman against her will in my castle. That's a serious offense." Through the soul echo, Stella felt Adrian's rage, carefully controlled but absolute. He was furious on her behalf, and it gave her courage. "I was never promised to you," Stella said, stepping forward. "My pack elders made an arrangement without my knowledge or consent. And even if they hadn't, I would never choose you. Not 3 years ago, and certainly not now." Connor's expression twisted. "You think you have a choice? You're a runaway, a barmaid. You have no status, no protection." "She has the soul echo." The words came from Adrian, spoken with such finality that Connor actually stepped back. "The what?" "The soul echo. An active, bonded connection between myself and Stella." Adrian moved to stand beside her, and the air around them seemed to shimmer as the echo reacted to their proximity. "Which means she has not only my protection, but a bond that supersedes any claim you could possibly make. By ancient law, recognized across all territories, the soul echo cannot be broken or denied." Connor's face went white, then red with fury. "That's impossible. She's nothing. She can't. You're the Alpha King. You can't be bonded to a—" "Careful," Mira said softly. "Very careful how you finish that sentence." The threat in her voice was unmistakable. Connor seemed to realize he'd gone too far, because he bowed stiffly and said through gritted teeth, "My apologies. I was surprised." "As are we all," Mira said with false sweetness. "But facts are facts. Stella is bonded to my son through the soul echo. Any attempt to claim her, harm her, or interfere with that bond will be considered an act of aggression against the crown. Are we understood?" Connor's hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "Understood." "Excellent. Then this audience is concluded. You're dismissed." Connor left, but not before shooting Stella one last look of pure venom. The moment the door closed behind him, Stella's legs gave out. Adrian caught her, pulling her against his chest while she shook with reaction. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "He can't touch you. I won't let him." "He looked like he wanted to kill me," Stella whispered. "Then it's fortunate," Mira said, standing and crossing to them, "that he'd have to go through both of us first. And I've killed better men than Connor for far less." The casual violence in her tone should have been alarming. Instead, Stella found it oddly comforting. The rest of the day passed in a blur of summit activities. Stella attended a luncheon with Mira, made polite conversation with visiting nobles, and did her best to project calm confidence despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. Connor's presence hung over everything like a storm cloud, but he kept his distance, apparently smart enough not to push his luck further. That evening, there was a formal ball to celebrate the summit's opening. Stella wore another of Rose's creations, deep green this time, with gold accents that caught the candlelight, and stood at the edge of the ballroom watching couples dance. She felt Adrian before she saw him, the soul echo pulsing warm in her chest as he crossed the room toward her with single-minded purpose. "Dance with me," he said, extending his hand. "Adrian, is that appropriate? We're supposed to be discreet." "I don't care." His amber eyes locked on hers. "I don't care about discretion or propriety or what anyone thinks. I want to dance with the woman I love. Let them talk." Stella took his hand. The moment they stepped onto the dance floor together, the entire ballroom seemed to pause. Conversations stuttered. Heads turned. The musicians, bless them, kept playing without missing a beat. Adrian pulled Stella closer than was strictly proper for a formal dance, and led her through the steps with surprising grace. Through the soul echo, she felt his joy, his pride, his absolute certainty that this was right. "They're all staring," Stella murmured. "Let them stare. Let them see what the soul echo looks like. Let them understand that you're mine and I'm yours, and there's nothing anyone can do to change that." They danced through one song, then another. Other couples gradually joined them on the floor, but Stella was only aware of Adrian, his strong hands, his warm presence, the way the echoes sang between them with perfect harmony. When the music finally paused, they stood together in the center of the ballroom, and Adrian did something completely unexpected. He went down on one knee. The room went absolutely silent. "Stella," Adrian said, and his voice carried to every corner of the great hall. "I know we've only known each other 2 weeks. I know this is fast and improbable and probably terrifies you, but the soul echo doesn't lie, and my heart doesn't lie, and I don't want to wait anymore to make this official." From somewhere in his jacket, he produced a ring. Simple silver set with a stone that seemed to shift between blue and amber depending on the light. "Will you marry me? Will you be my mate, my partner, my queen? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making you happy?" Through the soul echo, Stella felt his absolute sincerity, and underneath it, his fear that she might say no. She looked at him kneeling there, this powerful king who'd chosen her, and felt her heart overflow. "Yes," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Yes, absolutely, yes." The ballroom erupted in applause as Adrian stood and slipped the ring onto her finger. He kissed her, propriety completely abandoned now, and Stella kissed him back while the soul echo blazed between them like sunlight. They broke apart to cheers and well wishes from all sides. Mira was beaming. Even some of the nobles who'd been skeptical seemed genuinely happy. But in the back of the crowd, Stella caught a glimpse of Connor's face, twisted with rage and something else. Something that looked like calculation. She shivered despite Adrian's warmth, and through the echo she felt his instant concern. What's wrong? Connor. He looked. Before she could finish the thought, the ballroom doors burst open. A guard stumbled through, his face pale with shock. "Your Majesty," he gasped. "We have a situation. The Southern delegation. They've activated something. Some kind of old magic. It's affecting the soul echo bonds in the castle." Adrian went very still. "What do you mean, affecting?" "We don't know yet, but—" The guard's words were cut off by a sudden, searing pain that lanced through Stella's chest. Through the soul echo, she felt Adrian's matching agony, and then, impossibly, the bond began to fade. The warmth that had been constant for 2 weeks started to dim, like a candle being slowly smothered. "Adrian!" Stella gasped, reaching for him. He grabbed her hands, his face gone white with shock. "What's happening? The echo! I can barely feel you!" Mira was already moving, shouting orders to guards, demanding answers. But Stella could barely hear her over the panic roaring in her ears. The soul echo was dying, and somewhere in the chaos, she heard Connor's voice, cold and satisfied. "If I can't have you, then no one can." Epilogue. 3 months later. The tavern was exactly as Stella had left it. Worn wooden tables, the faint smell of ale and lemon polish. Greta humming behind the bar while she prepared for the evening crowd. But everything else had changed. Stella stood at the window of her small room above the tavern, touching the ring on her finger, the one Adrian had given her that night at the ball, when everything had still been perfect and full of promise. Through the window, she could see the market square bustling with life. Normal people living normal lives, unaffected by ancient magic or impossible bonds or kings who'd promised forever. "He'll find a way," Greta said from the doorway, as if reading her mind. "That boy's not going to give up on you just because some jealous fool tried to break your bond." "The echo is gone, Greta." Stella's voice was flat. "We can't feel each other anymore. The magic Connor used, it severed the connection." "Severed, not destroyed." Greta crossed to her, placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. "There's a difference, even if you can't feel it yet." Stella wanted to believe her, but 3 months of silence where there'd once been warmth, 3 months of letters from Adrian saying he was searching for answers, that he wouldn't give up, that he loved her despite the broken bond, had worn away her hope. She touched her stomach, where the tiny flutter of new life had just started to make itself known. She hadn't told him yet, hadn't found the words to write that the soul echo's last gift, given before it shattered, was growing inside her. A baby, conceived in those final moments before Connor's magic destroyed everything. "What am I going to do?" she whispered. "You're going to have faith," Greta said firmly. "Faith in that boy who knelt in a ballroom full of nobles and declared his love. Faith in magic older than Connor's hatred. And faith in yourself." Stella nodded, not trusting her voice. Below, in the street, a carriage rolled to a stop. An elegant carriage with familiar markings. Stella's heart lurched. Mira stepped out first, her expression fierce and determined. And then Adrian followed, and even from this distance, even without the echo to tell her, Stella could see it in his face. He'd found something. Some answer. Some hope. He looked up at her window as if he could sense her there, and even without the bond, their eyes met. And Stella felt it, a tiny flutter, so faint she almost missed it. The echo. Not gone. Not destroyed. Just sleeping. Waiting. And there you have it. Stella and Adrian's story has come to an end. Or has it? I know. I left you with that cliffhanger twist at the end. But tell me, do you want to know what happens next? How the soul echo can be restored? What did Adrian discover during those 3 months? And Stella's pregnancy? How will he react when he finds out? Leave in the comments. Which moment touched you the most? Was it the first time the echo activated in the bar? When Adrian's mother showed up and decided to help? The proposal at the ball? Or that twist ending with Connor, destroying everything? Do you think Stella should have left, or should have stayed and fought? And Connor, does he deserve a second chance at redemption, or does he deserve serious consequences for what he did? And the golden question, do you want the continuation of this story? Do you want to know how Stella and Adrian will reclaim the soul echo? What will happen when he discovers the baby? If you made it this far, thank you so much for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed the story, leave your like. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any supernatural romance stories. Activate the notification bell so you get notified every time I post a new video. I post every day. Comment below. Which part touched your heart the most? With love and magic, Maggie Reed.